different. So I thought I'd run through all these things. And I'm working with customers who are still not in that position to have got some of these things out there. And obviously in the current climate, you know, cloud management gateway is a real winner. You know, it's definitely worth investing time in to get implemented. So what exactly is it? Well, it's the ability to manage your internet-based clients, yeah, and this is without standing up any additional infrastructure. Okay, it's a cloud-based service, and you connect to that, so you're not having to stand up any kind of forward-facing, internet-facing management points and that sort of thing. Okay, it acts as a proxy between that cloud service and your internal infrastructure. Back in the day, you would be building a cloud distribution point as well to get content out to your clients. But these days, the CMG has now got this added extra bling in that you can tick a box when you set it up, and it will configure a cloud DP for you, effectively blob storage, delivering that content out to you. When it comes to the internal roles that you need to configure, it's really the management point and the software update point that need to be set up to allow that CMG traffic. The content, as I say, coming from a cloud DP, or if you're looking at Windows updates, then it's software updates, then it's going to point to Windows Update to get those. Co-management. Now, you've probably heard a lot about this anyway from Microsoft. Their message around this has changed recently, because originally it was all about the move to the cloud, but now the message is all about that potential coexistence. Co-management rather than coexistence. That's a separate thing, but co-management of devices, bridging on-prem with cloud, and that bridge may never go. It may be something you can never achieve to move to full cloud, so you have this connection the whole time, and effectively what you're doing is flipping workloads between Config Manager and Intune, so you can start to take in some of that cloud benefit and move towards that, whilst you know, applying that to your on-premise devices that may never move from on-prem, as I say. An example could be something like you want to flip Windows updates to be managed from the cloud, for example. And also, you know, as soon as you implement this, you get kind of cool things like remote wipe and straight away on your on-prem Windows 10 devices. Pretty nice. Tenant attach, as I say, initially I was kind of going, oh, what's all this about? Well, this is actually attaching your config manager instance to your tenant, and therefore starting to see some of your CM goodness in the portal. We're going to take a look at that later on, but little things like online status, hardware inventory, resource explorer, little things like that, which are appearing in your online admin center. And there's a pretty cool tweet the other day by Panu, where he showed the fact that he was using the endpoint manager console from his mobile phone. So now we're constantly connected to CM and we can access things from anywhere. Pretty cool. Okay, so cloud management gateway. To PKI or not to PKI, that's the question. Didn't perform that as well as Magneto there. Ian McKellen. So when it comes to setting up the CMG, you've got various choices to make. Okay, so initially when the CMG came out, everything had to be PKI. That's more secure, but it's complex for admins to set up, and they may not be sure on how to do that. So enhanced HTTP was introduced, which was less complex, but it's less secure because you're using self-signed certificates on your role servers, and there's no trust involved. Okay, but it's fairly simple to set up compared to PKI. We'll have a little comparison on the next slide to give you an idea about that. Just worth noting that devices that are using PKI need to know about the CMG. They need to start off on your internal network or a VPN connection to find the CMG when it does a location request, they'll become aware of it, and at that point you can then take the devices out onto the internet and they'll be managed with that. So that provides a challenge in this particular COVID scenario that we're in. If devices have already gone off site and you're now setting up a CMG, how do you get them talking to it? So the other options are with enhanced HTTP. As I say, it's less complex, but introduced recently was something called, in 2002, something called token authentication. Okay, so you don't need a client authentication certificate that you would have with PKI. You're using a token, but you've got to get that token to your devices. Now, if you're on the internal network, that's all fine. You can install and the device will pick up the fact that the CMG is there. But if you're on the outside network, on the internet, you're going to need to use the token reg tool, which Microsoft provide. That still provides a dilemma, because when you generate the registration details, they have to be added to your CCM setup parameters. So for your end users, they need to be admins to install the config manager client. So you have this problem still. You've still got to go through that process of how do I get that client onto that device. But once it's on there, the device is chatting to the CMG. The other option is for Azure Active Directory joined devices or hybrid ones. They can talk via eHTTP, and you can push the client via Intune. So you'd be using like a line of business application for that. You need to enter the command line parameters. When you install that, that's available on the Microsoft documentation, an example of the parameters there, but you can also get those details from when you set up co-management, and you can copy and paste those out. Worth noting that there are certain limitations around distribution of software by the CMG. So if you're distributing to users, then PKI doesn't cover that. Okay, so software distribution is limited to devices via the PKI setup, and that's just worth noting. Okay, so here's a little breakdown for you to give you a feel for that complexity around CMG. If you're using PKI, as I say, it's the most secure, but it has that certificate requirement, and therefore you need to generate all these certificates. So both scenarios, you'll be looking at an external PKI from a third-party provider. But internally, you'll need a certificate authority for the PKI scenario, and you need to set up an IS cert. That'll be for your management point, WSUS, all that kind of stuff. A DP cert, which is not needed for CMG, but if you're going to be going PKI internally, you'll want to secure your internal DPs. They'll need a client authentication certificate. Well, that's easily auto-enrolled if you're using group policy to push that out. But also you need to get your trusted routes from your CA and any subordinate certificates if you've got subordinate certificate servers. And you'll need to apply those to the configuration of the CMG, and we'll take a look at that shortly when we set it up. For the internet clients, they'll need to talk to a certificate revocation list. Okay, so again, you'll need a certificate for this for the external web server that would host it. And it's advised that you do set up a CRL. Again, it's around security. If you revoke any certificates for any reason, then you need to know that they've been revoked. They may not be trustworthy, whatever reason they've been revoked for, and your clients should be aware of that. If you don't set up a CRL, that's your choice. With your security team advising, but the recommendation really is to do that. If you want to know how to do that, I recommend taking a look at Niall Brady's PKI tutorials on setting up PKI with SCCM, and he does a run through there of the CRL. and how that's configured, but definitely worth considering and definitely worth implementing. Okay, so a quick run through of a CMG setup. So first up, you're going to have to check the availability of your CMG name. Okay, that's the name that you will assign to your CMG. And for example, I could set up memcmg.sccmsolutions.co.uk, but I'm going to check that first portion of the name, the memcmg, to make sure that's available. How do I do that? Let me just bring up a browser here. Coming through. Yep. Okay. So we need to go into Cloud Services Classic and do a quick check to see if it's available. So if I click Add here, I can check for a DNS name. Now note that cloudapp.net, we need to map that later with a CNAME record. But if I do a search here, MEMCMG, I'm told here that that DNS name must be available. It's already been taken. So I'm looking for some kind of uniqueness to make sure that's not been used already. Now, bear in mind, I'm not reserving this at this point. So I have to go through the process of generating a certificate request, creating my CNAME record, and then setting up the CMG before I finally get that name. So it could go in the interim period, and that has happened in the past. So my recommendation is try something unique here that may not be taken and probably won't be taken. Interesting, MEMCM's available. So again, that could be snapped up fairly quickly. But if I stick on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a few numbers on the end, I'm all good. Okay, so once I check that's available, as I say, I'm going to generate an external certificate request, go to my third party, get the cert back. That could take some time. And again, that uniqueness is key for that to make sure it doesn't get taken. Create a CNAME record where I map into that cloudapp.net address. So yeah, my external DNS name, map into that. And then I make sure I get some prereqs in place. Now, I'm not going to run through these just to say, check the docs, but I need to set up some resource providers in my subscription and register those, Classic Compute, Microsoft Storage, and then set some permissioning around APIs. Now, that's interesting because the documentation around that's a little out of date, so it can get confusing there. So the docs hopefully are going to get updated to reflect the new interface that got released recently. But when it boils down to it, there's 3 steps to deployment of the CMG. First up, we need to actually create the CMG and that cloud service. We then need to add a connection point, and then we'll configure the roles in Config Manager as well to accept CMG traffic. Okay, so we're going to go with the live demo right now and build a CMG. I'll show you the options. This is going to be PKI, but I'll point out the differences when you do an enhanced HTTP CMG. And we'll see how this goes. And fingers crossed, we'll have a CMG by the end of this presentation. Okay, so in Config Manager, under the admin bit, we've got our cloud services area. We do some initial bit here. I'm not going to go into it, but we need to create this cloud management service that creates a couple of apps for us, which the CMG taps into. I'll point it out as it comes up. We start off by creating the CMG. We need to sign in with a GA account here. Okay, so that app name there is what would have been created in that cloud management service section. So this has recognized all my details. I'm just going to pick a subscription here to place all the resource group and the CMG into. Note here, there's a drop down again here for US government cloud. The vast majority of us are not going to be using that. We're going to be going with public cloud. Okay, so this is the meaty bit around the CMG, the configuration, and we need to just provide some information here to get the CMG configured. Certificate file. if I click on this, I'm going to provide it with the PFX file from my external certificate that's been provided to me, okay? Hopefully that's right. Yeah, cool. Okay, so there's my external address. It's got that mapping in there to that cloud.net for the deployment. Regional choices here. Note that your clients, when they're connected to a CMG, aren't region aware, so they're just going to pick a CMG that's available to them. So I could put this wherever, but I may put it in a certain location because there's a slight cost difference or whatever. But most of my office is based in the US or whatever. We're connected in through there, or West Europe, whichever. So I'm going to go with East US for now. I'm going to create a new resource group that's auto-populated for me, which is pretty cool. VM instances, well, the recommendation from Microsoft is to create 2 instances here for resilience. A couple of lightweight VMs that will cost you around £80 per month. I don't know what that is in dollars, maybe 90, 100, something like that. And then notice the checkbox at the bottom. This is the bit where I can tick a box and effectively create a cloud distribution point just by ticking the box. Fantastic, nice and easy. So the next 2 options now for PKI, I'm going to choose this. Yeah, this is what I really want. I want that CRL to be checked by devices. But I have got the option to untick, ideally not. If I'm running with an enhanced HTTP, I would untick that because my clients don't have a certificate. Okay, they don't need to check for revocation. So the certificate box here, well, what's that do? I've already provided my certificate. Well, this is to upload the details around your trusted route. So again, eHTTP, I wouldn't do anything here, I just leave it. But because I'm using full PKI, I'm going to select my trusted route and add that in. So that's the configuration for the CMG, nice and simple. The next page is all around alerting. Have I gone over X amount of gigabytes in a 14-day period? I can stop the service, etc. If I do, I'm just going to go with the defaults for that one. And off we go. Okay, so this takes probably about 15 minutes or so to build. So we're not going to watch that. That'd be extremely tedious. But we are going to just see if this thing kicks off. So you'll see here it's set at the moment, the status of provisioning. Provisioning has started. So we have a log file, cloudmgr.log, and off it goes. And it started to do its business. So all things going well, we should have a CMG ready for us at some point when we come back. And that's just working on the top portion here, which is CMG Cloud Service to Azure. So we'll come back and we'll add in a cloud connection point and then just check the role servers to allow comms. Okay, so design considerations now when you're building a CMG. If you're running a CAS, for example, that's where the CMG needs to go and connection points are added per primary. If you've just got a primary site server, then the CMG gets added there. You can create multiple CMGs and connection points, and that just adds in lots of resilience for you. You can now associate a CMG with a boundary group. This could be used for fallback, but also take a look at, and this should be hit in 2006 because it's in TPs and it's been well received. You should be able to add a VPN boundary group with the new release of Config Manager. And that's going to come in pretty handy for clients as well. And they might want to be associated with that CMG. You might want to direct them straight out for Windows updates, etc., to avoid saturating your network internally when grabbing those kind of updates. Your internet clients don't use a boundary group. Okay, there's no point trying to associate them with anything. How do you define what IP address range they would be using, etc.? They just pick CMG when they're out on the outside world. And as I said before, the client isn't region aware, so it will just use any CMG that it sees fit. Just a checklist here. I'm not going to run through them all, but there's certain things aren't supported with CMG, and it's worth highlighting those. Remote tools being a biggie. So if your clients are out on the internet, you've got to find some other way. It could be TeamViewer to remotely connect to those devices. Client push is not supported. That can prove a challenge. As I say, trying to get the clients out there in the first instance does. But also worth highlighting, certain task sequence scenarios aren't supported. So for example, full OSD isn't, but in-place upgrade is, which is a real bonus, particularly as we approach end of life at the end of the year for can't remember which release now, but there's one coming up. It's the 1803 possibly. Whether that gets pushed back or not remains to be seen. Okay, so let's flip to co-management while that CMG builds, and we'll flip back to it later and see how that's getting on. I call these paths to fulfillment, although I don't normally. I just wrote that for this particular presentation. But we've got two scenarios here, okay, when setting up co-management. First up is managing our intranet-based clients. Okay, these are devices that were already managed by Config Manager, and we'll need those to be enrolled in Azure AD, and that's part of the process for setting up. Okay, managing our internet-based clients. Well, these are Azure AD joined already. We'll need to push that Config Manager client out to them. Yeah, so we already mentioned it previously, creating a line of business app with the relevant parameters. And as I demo CMG, I'll show you what those are. Not CMG, co-management, sorry. CMGs are required here for your internet-based clients to perform some config manager tasks, and the configuration of it isn't different at all from what I'm doing at the moment. So once you've got CMG set up, you can kind of tap into that with co-management. Okay, so your intranet clients then, what kind of steps do you need to go through to get these ready for co-management? Well, you'll need to set up a Azure AD Connect and set up hybrid Azure AD join. Okay, so you run through the wizard in AAD Connect, turn on pass-through authentication, single sign-on, that kind of thing. You will need to direct the clients to register with Azure AD. Okay, now that's achieved in Config Manager with a client setting. Let's see if I can zoom into that. Yeah, okay. So that second drop down there in the cloud services settings to automatically register new Win 10 devices with Azure AD needs to be set to yes. And in fact, I think that's actually the default setting now. You'll need to configure auto enrollment of devices into Intune, and note that whilst we have this message that we now have an Intune license if we have Config Manager, we still need an Azure AD Premium license to auto enroll those devices into Intune, so they need to be assigned accordingly. Auto enrollment itself, that's achieved in the Mobility MDM and MAM section of Azure AD, and we just turn this on. Yeah, now you might want to scope it out a little bit and click the sum box and then assign groups or whatever, but I've just gone with all for that. And then really it's a case of enabling co-management in Config Manager itself, and I'll show you that. It's already enabled in my lab, but I can just show you the properties which reflect what you do in the wizard anyway. The internet client coming in via enhanced HTTP. Effectively, the next two are doing what we're doing at the moment in the background, the cloud services and the CMG. And as I say, the Config Manager client needs to be pushed out via Intune. And if I zoom in here the command line arguments need to be added, so we can grab those from the co-management properties in Config Manager. Okay, so let's do a co-management demo. See how we get on with this one. Still running away, that's cool. Let's give it a little refresh, see where it's at. It's ready, cool, excellent. Come back to that later. Okay. So this is my tech preview lab where I have co-management set up. And under here is co-management. Right, okay. So normally you'd be right-clicking here and creating, but as I say, this has already been configured. So I just need to go and do the properties. We'll give this a moment to load up. It takes a second or two. There we go. Okay, hopefully you can see this. I'll zoom in. Okay, so again, we have to authenticate for tenant onboarding, okay? And again, our GA account will get us up and running there. So this enablement section is really defining what we're going to enable for co-management. Now we have a choice. Excuse me. We have a choice here. We can go with none, pilot, or all. Okay. So when we piloting, we'll define a collection. As you can see there, I've got all co-managed devices with a couple of devices in there. So just the workloads will just be when they're flipped between Config Manager and Intune. It will just affect those devices. If I go with all, then it will switch the workloads for any co-managed Windows 10 device. So I'm being quite granular here. I'm just testing things out and I'm piloting. There's that command line string that I can just copy out, paste into my Intune line of business app. Okay, so workloads. We have some sliders we can click, slide across and move them around. Now, because I'm piloting, again, I'm going to slide to the pilot's Intune column. But again, if I move over here, that's going to effectively set it for all my co-managed devices. We've got some choices here around what we want to around what we want to set to pilot with Intune. Compliance items is the one I've been playing with, which effectively will give me some conditional access. I can look at flipping client apps over, for example. I can look at Office 365 apps, and below that, Windows updates. So I've got a real choice here as which I want to test for co-management. When it comes to actually staging this, I can even be granular with the devices that I pilot. I can actually go in and pick separate collections if I want. Yeah. So I've gone in and I've said, okay, I'm actually going to have one device which I'm going to pilot compliance policies against, which is effectively limited against these two. Yeah. And I can separate it all out, each individual workload. I could just say, right, I'm going to siphon this all off and I'm going to keep things separate because I want to see the impact. I want to make sure everything's fine. I don't want any contamination happening here. And I just want to make sure these things work for me. So that's pretty cool. That's quite new. This is a TP lab, so I'm not sure if this is in 2002. I think it might just be pointing to the one collection from memory. Okay. So let's take a look at a device itself and see what happens on the device. Okay, so I've gone into the Config Manager properties here and take a look at this co-management capabilities section. Now that's something new I'm going to see when I'm co-managing. I've got co-management capability of 3. What does that mean? Okay, well, Ben has written a great blog post about this. I recommend you taking a look. But to just
I thought you was
overview,
going to ask me.
yeah. What's the answer?
Oh, quick search Google.
Yeah, Google bytebend. It's bytebend.com, isn't it? Yep. Yeah. So when a device is co-managed without any workloads assigned to it, it's going to have a value of 1 automatically. That means it's co-managed. So I've pushed out some compliance policies. They have a value of 2. So what this does is adds 1 and 2 together, and my co-management capability becomes 3. There's a whole bunch of different values. Again, I recommend checking Ben's blog about that because he lists some of those off. So this is cool. This is a great indicator straight away that co-management is working for me. But we can check this in the logs and see where that magical kind of reports in. So in this co-management handler log, we get the information back from this. Now, if I do a little search, first up around auto enrollment, yeah, has that happened for my device? So this auto enroll is true, tells me that, yeah, this device is enrolled. And I will actually see this in the console as well. So let me just bring up, not that, somewhere. I think, yes, it's here. Let me just drag this over. Okay, so in the portal, this is the endpoint.microsoft.com portal now that we have to use. The Intune section has been deprecated from Azure portal. And if I look at all devices, I can see this is the device I'm on. I clicked on it. Let me go back. It's co-managed, yeah. Note it's not compliant. Okay, so what I've made sure is that my compliancy isn't working. Okay, so I want it to be non-compliant for demonstration purposes. Okay, so cool, that's in there. It's co-managed. Now, if I check for the capabilities, I think it's this one. Yeah, capabilities is 3. And there you can see it flipping. So at this point here, capabilities were 1. So that was co-managed, but at some point between that and this next check, I flipped the workload to set the compliance policies, and that capability became 3. So a great check, visual check straight away that this is all good. Now, what I've done on here is I've set some conditional access that says if this device isn't compliant, then don't allow me to use Office apps, for example. Okay. Now this device doesn't have net connectivity, so what would I see? Effectively this, yeah. So this is this device. I tested it out earlier, grabbed the screenshot. So my test user, the conditional access is set against the user. Test user 1 wasn't allowed to use Office if the conditional access rule wasn't compliant. So great way of saying, you know, you need to be in a compliant state to access this software. Cool. Okay. So that's a simple overview of co-management in its most simplistic form. It gives you an idea of the things you can start to just kind of play with, really, with co-management. But let's flip back to our CMG, which looks to be doing the business in the background. Okay, so we have our CMG now is in ready state. Okay, it's built out in Azure, provisioning is completed. So we need to go back to that second step in that 3-step process now, which was to create a connection point between config manager and the CMG. And that's easily achieved through adding in a site system role. So I'm going to do this on my primary site. And we've all seen this before. But now we have Cloud Management Gateway Connection Point. Cool. Click on that. And my details have auto-populated. Obviously, if I've got more than one CMG, I'm going to be clicking the drop down and choosing the appropriate one to connect to. And that's just the next. I'm done. Okay, so yep, we have another log here. That one's moaning because I don't think it existed. Oh yeah, it was offline. The lab was offline. Okay, so this thing will get going shortly. Here we go. This is the SMS Cloud Proxy Connector log. It starts off with some failures to build a HTTP connection. That's kind of a standard from what I'm seeing, and it just takes a couple of retry attempts to go in and connect in. So whilst that's ticking away, let's look at that third part of the equation for setting up the CMG, which is to set our site system roles to allow CMG traffic. And I'll just point out some differences between the configuration here in PKI and with the enhanced HTTP. Okay, so the management point. This just to highlight, this is the full PKI lab, yeah. So the management point here, it's HTTPS. All I do is tick this box and turn on the ability to allow config manager traffic to the CMG. To allow config manager cloud management gateway traffic. It's a tongue twister for me there. You'll get the same option in a SUP. I haven't got a SUP on my lab at the moment, so again, I just go in and check that box, tick that box. On a TP site, I should just flip to the TP actually and show you on that rather than highlighting it there. On the TP site, there's a difference in configuration. This is around actually setting up enhanced HTTP in the first place. And you go into the site properties, and under communication security, you need to check this box. Yeah, this sets up HTTP for you, so that will allow self-signed certificates to be generated. But what that does then is it opens up the ability to select that CMG traffic checkbox whilst your roles are in HTTP mode. Okay. So here I've got HTTP from my management point, but it's allowing the CMG traffic, and it's doing that in a secure way with the enhanced HTTP. If I haven't checked that box in the site properties, I wouldn't have the option here to check this. I would have to click on here to do it and that sort of thing. So that's where the enhanced HTTP configuration comes into play. Okay, let's flip back to a config manager box and have a look here. Okay, so this is doing the business now. It's starting to process, starting to connect. Yeah, to the on-prem with the CMG. So let's take a little refresh now. In here, under our CMG, check connection points, and this is connected. Now, prior to that, you know, when we had that sort of red stuff going on, this would be in a disconnected state until it gets connected. But that's great, showing it's connected. So I've effectively completed the 3 steps there to set this up. I can run a connection analyzer. This is a great little tool, which will just tell me if everything's looking good. Quick check to make sure services are all successfully working. I just click start and off it goes. And go on, yes, it works. So everything's cool. So that's my CMG up and running. On the client side, we have some things to do. As I say, this is PKI, so my device is internal. It's going to need to know about the CMG. Currently, it's intranet, and in the network section, it knows nothing about. This is where the details of the CMG will appear. So let's see if we can give this a little kick. Okay. So this is going to do a location request. Hopefully it then picks up the fact that the CMG exists. Typically not at the moment. Let's give it a quick boot, see if we can get anything out of it. There we go, perfect. So now it's aware of the CMG. Okay, so I can now take this client out onto the internet and it'll work. So because I'm working on an intranet connection at the moment, I can actually do a little bit of jiggery pokery here in registry, and this key here, client always on internet. Yeah, it's under this software, local machine software, Microsoft CCM security. I can force this to be internet, yeah, with a value of 1. Good for testing, not recommended in production. Again, let's give the service a little boot. And fingers crossed. Okay, cool. So this now is reporting as always internet. So that's going to use the CMG now for its policy stuff and for connecting in. Note it's saying assign management point is still the internal MP, but that's going to disappear shortly. Taking a look at location services, let's drag it down to the bottom. Yeah, here you go, assigned. Internet management point assigned, CMG. Perfect, that's exactly what we want. And now if I click away from this and back in, there we go. So that management point has disappeared, the internal reference is gone, and this is key. This is what I'm interested in. I'm not going to push out any software to it or anything like that, but effectively you can now manage this client as you would internally, except with those kind of caveats of the things that don't work. Okay. So tenant attach. So this is pretty cool stuff. You could do a whole session around tenant attach, really, and dig into this. This is quite cool. But we have a few minutes left to tie this up. Am I right for 5 minutes, Ben? Is that okay?
Yeah, you're fine, mate.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so as I say, it's simple to implement, so long as your lab is networking properly, as I found out last night. It's Config Manager 2002 as a minimum, and I'm going to show you. I think it's possibly, yeah, it's a TP. So Sandy has jumped in at the last minute to help me out on this one by providing me access to her lab to show tenant attached. So this is a TP 2006, I believe. So there's some extra things that you get in this tenant attached with 2006 preview that you don't get with 2002, but I have no doubt at all these things will hit on the CB release. So these are just things that you need to know really for setting up the configuration of tenant attached, but I'm not going to drill into those. Let's just show you some of the bits on the tenant attached admin center. Yeah, it's more interesting than prereqs. Okay, so, oh no, hold on, not that. Clicking in the wrong place, never mind. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is a client that has got its details uploaded to tenant attached. Now, actually, just to go back briefly, I could show you where that's achieved in the console. I probably closed that down, didn't I? Okay, let's go back in here and into the properties. Okay, so under config upload on the co-management section, you've got this checkbox, upload to the admin center. Yeah, simple as that. Turn that on. You can have all your devices uploading or just specific ones, depending how you want to pilot that. And that turns it on for you. And then let's go back. So the details will start to flow. There's a log file that checks every 15 minutes and uploads information. Ben, can you just mute for a sec, mate?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that.
Cool. Yeah, so it will check every 15 minutes to upload any new information. But here we go. You've got some cool things here. You can run scripts, run applications, and you can have use Resource Explorer, etc. So here's some client information. It tells me this client's online. It's reported into this management point, etc. All pretty cool information. Which boundary group it's in. Yeah, pretty cool. Timelines, quite nice. Okay, take a look at timeline. Okay, this is going to give you information around this particular device as to when it shut down, when it had an application problem, when it was updated. And you can filter here. You can go in and select different timelines. You can select different types of events that you want to know about. I think this is pretty cool. Even as a starter, there's some juicy information in there. When it comes to Resource Explorer, okay. Oh, hold on. That doesn't work because that's something new with TP07, which Sandy's not running yet. So if I was running TP07, I'd get Resource Explorer in there. CM Pivot. Okay, let's take advantage of the CM Pivot's power on the web, yeah, to query against a device. Let's just run a quick one here. I don't know, operating system. Off it goes and it checks and then brings back that information to me. I think this is pretty cool, to be honest. And as I said, you know, Panu was, I think, accessing this via his mobile phone the other day, so that's pretty good. We can't escape now. We're constantly connected to CM. In the cloud. Brilliant. There we go. Comes back, tells me all the information I need to know. Okay. I don't think I actually put on a finish up slide, so never mind. But that's it. Effectively, a quick run through of CMG, co-management and tenant attach. I hope you got some nuggets of information there from that, which would help you make some decisions as to whether you're going to implement this, or even just to get some feel for tenant attach, co-management, and how they can assist you. Ben, it's back to you.
Thank you, Paul. Marvelous session, mate. Loads of good tips in there.
Yeah.
I must apologize.
Sorry.
I began recording after you announced your podcast. So did you want to mention your podcast again, just so others can see it?
Yeah, sure. Bit of self-promotion. Perfectly. Yeah. So let me flick right back to there. Just a couple of jerks. So that's available on Spotify, SoundCloud, whatever. And that's me talking with someone in the IT community. Could be Windows, could be Raspberry Pi. I've got a guy from the Azure community coming up, I think, next week. And that's a weekly thing. It comes out every Wednesday. There's 20 episodes out already. They last about an hour and 10. Perfect for a commute. That's why I wanted to start this up, but commutes don't happen anymore. So just pop it on while you're chilling in the garden or something. And there'll be 26 episodes in the first season. And then I'm going to take a break and then come back with more. So line up some good guests. There's some pretty decent guests on there already, really. So yeah, check it out.
Yeah, there's some really cool stuff on there. I'll just put the Twitter handle into the chat if anybody wants to add that to the follow now. Really good stuff. I really like that session, Paul. Have you seen people who already have internet-based clients they hadn't set CMG up? Have you seen much uptake in using the token-based registration?
Well,
to get those clients
a customer I'm working with at the moment are looking at CMG. They haven't actually got it in place. Okay, token authentication. So this is the thing you've got to take into account. It's around security. Okay, but you may go, okay, this isn't secure enough for me, and I want to have PKI. Okay, but then you've got a problem. So it's okay. Am I willing to relax that security slightly, go with the HTTP? That gives me the ability to push this out, and so that's appealing to people for sure. But and you know, I would kind of go, yeah, if you're in that situation, why not do it? But this particular customer I'm working with who want to implement CMG are fully PKI already. So yeah, for them they can't. They got to go with that PKI solution. So I would say, you know, this it's around making things easy for yourself. And if your security team are happy with that, definitely go for it. Definitely do it, because it's going to make things a lot easier. Okay, there's still a challenge, as I said. You need to push the client out, and with that token information, and you need admin. So it's a bit chicken and egg. You know, how do you do that? And if you've got 1,000 devices out on the net, you don't want to be connecting to each one of those manually and helping out. You know, it's great, but it still provides a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a band-aid for some scenarios, isn't it? So some people, that may be the only option, as you say.
Well, we kind of had to just all jump, didn't we, and leave the offices.
We did.
So, yeah. So people are now looking for ways to get this done, and you know, we're going to see a lot of work from home goodness in the new config manager release for sure.
Yeah.
The other option is, I think Sandy's going to mention it next. I won't steal her thunder, but it's, you know, why not bother with a CMG? Why not have it? You know, don't bother with it, because there are other options.
Yeah.
As well. But you know, it's cool stuff. Yeah, I mean, CMG's been out for quite a while. I wrote a blog about it a couple of years ago, and the uptake this year has been huge, hasn't it? It's massive.
It is. Yeah, you're right. Maybe if you get a moment, pop that blog post in the chat so people can see it.
I would do, but I wouldn't recommend using it. It's kind of there, but it's out of date. So it has things like an Azure management certificate that's not needed anymore. You know, so and also I had to set up a cloud DP, which, you know, now you're just ticking a box. Brilliant. I'll put it there anyway. It's a good reference, but I wouldn't use it as a step-by-step anymore.
Cool. It's one of those things, isn't it? You know, because if we've all been using, well, I say all of us, you know, those who have used config manager, it's pretty well established in our environment. So adding a CMG, we can make use of all of the, you know, all of the configuration that we've put the time and effort into making almost perfect, you know, available to the internet clients. Whereas, you know, if moving the workloads for co-management does work, but there is also a lot of consideration, because, you know, you may not have made the environment so that it just works by switching the workload. There are some caveats around legacy policies still applying. I know when we done it, we got caught out with a couple of legacy group policy objects that were not overwritten by CSPs and Intune. So so it's also
I've showed you the easy bit, which is just checking some stuff. When you start to dig further, you're going to get problems. You know, I mean, troubleshooting is what we're about, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
Finding the problems. That's where the fun starts. Digging into things. I find, why is this not working when it really should? I like my tenant attach. Yeah, exactly. So,
well, it done your prayer today, mate. Thank you ever so much.
Well, thanks to Sandy for that, for letting me use her lab just for that section. Yeah, cool.
Thanks, Sandy. Top man. Thanks, Paul. Very kind.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
Sandy, are you still there?
Yes, I am still here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, there you go. You're back in the room.
Yeah. Well, I just saw someone raised a hand, I think minutes ago. So does anyone have question for Paul? If you have, then you can just open the mic and ask it.
I'm going to take a look in the chat section as well if there are any questions. So if you have any, just pop them in the chat. I'll be around for 10-15 minutes or so.
Cool, thank you, Paul. I couldn't see anything pop up. There's some stuff about Azure credits. Yeah, maybe take a look. That'd be cool. But as Sandy rightly said, if at the end of the session you've got a question and you don't feel like it's too complex to pop in chat, if you just mention in chat that you want to say something, we can invite you to speak and ask that question for sure. Share the love. So Sandy, hello.
Hi. Hello.
We've actually spoken before, have we, on camera? You know, this is the first time we've
Yeah,
met.
not in real life. I think we chat in Twitter, but we not really like spoke before.
Yeah,
not
I
really.
think I was at an event that you were at WMUG in London years ago, and you were there. I think you spoke to Leon about some Android stuff. So
Yes.
I've been in the same room as you once before. So
Yes, in that point, yes. Sorry.
It's good to have you
Leon
with
showed
us.
me about Samsung the keynotes, how to enroll to the intern. So it was really cool.
Yes, that was it. It's good to see you virtually and have you with us. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to your session. Did you want to just mention to the folks what you're going to be talking about?
Yes, let me show my slide.
Sure.
Well, I won't go to much technical details. This is more like a case study for one of my customers. So let me introduce myself a bit. So I'm Sandy Zheng. I don't like code. I like except ice cream, but then I live in Finland for a really long time. What else? I'm Microsoft Enterprise Mobility MVP, and here's my Twitter. You can see it. If you want to follow, then follow me, or if you already have, and thank you. So the case study, it's about one of the clients. It's Finnish government agency. They have actually about 7,000 seats. So I'm not allowed to tell their names, but I have the permission to tell their stories. So if I accidentally say their names, then please do a beep in the video recording if that happens.
Yeah, we can do some editing afterwards. That's fine.
Yeah. So let me change the next slide. Well, as I said, they have 7,000 seats and lots of users. So back in about end of March, and Finnish government has ordered that every Finnish government employee have to work at home as much as possible. So this customer has 2 VPN in use in that point. They have the direct access, and then they have this kind of really normal dial-in VPN as a backup, or not actually a backup because they have really critical application that doesn't support IPv6. So like a half of the users, about 3,000 or 4,000, then they are always hang out in this normal VPN. And the normal VPN itself doesn't have split tunnel at all. Of course, it's just a dial-in. So the VPN system was not really meant for support 7,000 users in the same time. It has never meant for it. So you can imagine that one day when government have this kind of order that everyone have to go home, and then they just go home, and next morning they just turn on the machine and everyone connect to VPN. So in the first hour, so the VPN and the direct access, and they were just totally stuck, and the server itself was crashed, and it was terrible. So first thing we did, we sent our email, and we just tell the users that please don't use a VPN if you don't have to. So that helped a little bit. And then it was running to Patch Tuesday, and we had to stop the patching because customers think that would help. What else we did? It was in the same time we were supposed to do in-place upgrade. So we're supposed to now doing the planning for upgrade their Windows 1709 to a newer version. And also in the same time, they had this project, they had the idea that they wanted to move their on-prem email to the cloud. So which means they also want to upgrade the Office client. They were using this old Office 2016 client, so wanted to really update to Office 365. So there was many things happening at the same time. And then it became a problem. So it comes to us asking advice, how can we help, right? So am I talking too fast?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. Sometimes I intend to talk too fast.
That's
and
because
my husband always tell me to slow down.
It's fine. It's because you're passionate about what you're talking about. That's cool.
Yeah, my brain was running really fast. So. Okay. So we were thinking in that moment, as like Paul just introduced that about cloud management, gateway, and code management. So our first thought is that will help. It definitely will help, right? And then we start thinking, okay, if we are going to do the cloud management gateway, or if we are going to do the co-management, what it takes, what is the requirement. So first we write down on the paper some sort of like a basic information, what is going to take us and what is the current situation. So as Paul just already tell us, there is a PKI and then there's enhanced HTTP. There is a little bit differences about it, right? So if I'm using config manager using PKI, and if the device are not hybrid Azure AD joined, then only device policy will work and user won't. So which means the hybrid Azure AD join will be the best way to do. And even so, if we are going to do enhanced HTTP, and we still will need a hybrid, either for way. And also for co-management, and the first thing we need to do is again hybrid. So we mark down everything, what we think is the hybrid is the way we have to do first. That's something basic. And then we start thinking, how are we doing to hybrid? So we read through all the documentation and we tested that. And then we also noticed, of course, and Microsoft has recommended Windows 10 1803 and up, it will be a recommendation. Because if we are using, or we are using the 1709, right? And I checked the tenant, all their devices was already Azure AD registered because it has been running for a few years. And in this case, it's kind of there's duplicate records. So before can do the hybrid, we will have to clean it up. So I was thinking, I really don't want to do it. I really want to do the way like how Microsoft recommended. So I have marked it down that it would be good to upgrade first to 1803. So that's another thing. And then another thing come to the notice that they were using also ADFS, and a really old version of that is not the 2016. I think it was 2012. And we tested that, it also works, but it take a little bit challenging to make it work. So comes on that, we have a team of people, about four of us. So we start do a planning. I intend to do this kind of thing for brainstorming. So I don't usually do the way like a plan A, plan B, plan C, and list everything and which plan is better. I don't really do that. So I like to do the way it's an empty paper and everyone have their ideas and everyone just throw their idea on the paper. It doesn't matter, doesn't make any sense, and it really doesn't matter that if we are actually going to do it, just anything come to your mind, you put it down. Like I just say the cloud management gateway or distribution point or cloud distribution point or co-management or VPN. We put everything down. And then we start analyze what is the pros and what's the cons. And is it possible we do it or can we not to do it? Or is it necessary? So if something that we make a decision, we mark it green, this is good to go. And if something comes to a question, is it like a okay, yes or no, then we put a question on it. And then there is that kind of thing that is absolutely no, no, no. Then we will just override it. So as now you can see, we first mark the VPN. VPN is a critical thing for them. So it's not like if I just build CMG or co-management is going to help because they have this application that has to work over VPN. And we did not have the time build virtual environment for them. We just didn't. So it comes to VPN, we also think about, should we like buy some service? You know, Finnish government, usually they love to buy service. But we also don't have the time and it's also expensive. We happen to have this one really cool guy, Nico. So he said that he can build always on VPN, he can do it. So we just let him do it. So we get a little bit help from Microsoft in Finland, Sami. So he also helped us and build a VPN. And then he also warned us about Windows 10 1709. He said it's not 100% work. So I didn't really believe him. So we tested that in a few users. And the profile is deployed, looking good. And direct access profile is removed, everything looking good. but VPN just don't work. So we should trust the Microsoft in this case. So we fixed that by upgraded few of those clients to 1909, and then it's like a poof, it's not working. So then we have a decision, okay, we have to build an always on VPN, and we have to upgrade to 1909 that we know. And then about cloud management gateway, and it's also the same question. So if we have the VPN, two of them, so what the gateway will actually help, it acts like a proxy, and it was originally meant for internet clients. So in this case, we put a really big question mark on it. Do we spend some time to do it? And of course, there's no drawback, definitely not. CMG is a really good feature, excellent. But I also consider, because they have this kind of so-called solution, this kind of service provider who manage their managed service, they has never actually put a price tag on cloud about CMG or config manager. They don't have this kind of like a service product. They don't really have. So as me, I should offer them a solution that can fix their current problem and also good for their production in the future. And I just couldn't make a decision that if I'm going to click my mouse really fast and build up some fancy cool cloud system for them, who is going to take care of it? So no one can give me the answer. So I put a really big question mark on it. And then comes to device management, and I would really love to have them on board to co-management. Honestly, I'm sometimes still doubting my own decision that should I put them on board co-management or should I don't? I still doubt that. So, but in that point, I didn't see co-management will help it. And afterward, they still need a hybrid, and they can't do the hybrid. They shouldn't do the hybrid before they got the upgrade. So our main focus is still back to the way that it should go to fix the VPN, because that is the key problem. Every other thing can reduce the workload. It can, but it's not like fixing the real problem that what they actually wanted to fix. Does it make any sense? So comes to upgrade, we also think of that, should we do the in-place upgrade using like a task sequence, like many other company does? And we also have a task sequence that is already ready. We tested that like 1 million times, and then there's a driver in it, and everything is perfect. I can push that. But there's a but, because 4,000 users are connected to the old VPN, doesn't have split. So if they're going to upgrade from in-place upgrade task sequence, then they are going to pull all the content from our server once again, and our VPN wouldn't hold it. So the only way we can do, we just do the feature upgrade. So we do this kind of no content package so that the device can download the content from the internet. And that's the only thing we come to our mind that what can reduce, right? So, and oh, I skipped one slide, but anyway. And also about the Office package that normally how we deploy Office package from config manager is that you first using a setup.exe and you use the XML file, and then you download all the content, and then you pack it in one package, right? And then you deploy that. That's the normal way you do it, as always. So I come to my mind is the package is so big, it's 3 gig, and there's no way I can really dare to push that out from config manager. It's going to overkill again. So I come to my mind that how can I do it? And then I said, okay, well, let's do it. And I just push up the setup.exe and without the content, only one setup.exe with one XML file. And the XML file, there's no setting about where's the source. So when the client gets the package, it will start download the installation content directly from the internet. So basically, it's the same way how intern push out Office 365 package, exactly the same way. So in this case, it will just download it from the always-on VPN split terminal and get everything from the cloud. So it won't pull anything from my server. So that's the thing that it will help. And we also tested that, and it works excellent. But before that, of course, we really also need to upgrade the Windows 10 first, and we need to build up the VPN and everything. So that's what we, at the end, this is now what we did. So we first built a VPN, tested that, and then we do the feature upgrade, right? And then when the feature upgrade is done, and then we start push out Office 365. And after that, basically, everything is actually good to go. Everything what we did here in the end, basically, is prepare for the future that if they really want to move to the cloud, like using CMG or using co-management. Everything what we did in the past 2 months, back in April and May, it will help. And well, we couldn't have really much time to think this whole thing because it was really in urgent. And Finnish government, usually they go to holidays around June. And usually around June 15, it will be the time that this kind of time that no change and no big change are allowed to do. So we have really short timeline to do everything for these 7,000 users. Is just really tight scheduled. But then in the same time, they also really want to improve their security. Well, because everyone work at home and we really don't know what they do. So what we implement is also we did some application proxy, Azure application proxy. So just in case that they really wanted to try it out. And then we implement conditional access with MFA because they are going to using some Office 365 and Teams and SharePoint, that kind of stuff. So this is something that we also did for them. And then I also let them try out the autopilot. So we send out around 10 test machines so that they can try out this kind of cloud-only devices, like a totally fully Azure AD John only. And so they can try out how this feels, if it fits them, and if they want to later move to the cloud, that would be excellent. And then I also configured to them this attack surface reduction route. This is actually really important. How can I say that? I think from yesterday Twitter, there's a tweet about they cannot bypass conditional access or MFA, that kind of things. And then attack surface reduction rule will be the one could actually help. And many people misunderstood that for that you need the MDAP license, but that's not true. You don't really need it. So basically, if you have Windows 10, you can just configure that anytime you want. But just remember when you do that, put first in audit mode first, and so that you can check. You don't really block anything really crazy completely, block everything out. So don't do that. Just check it out first. And MDAP is something that you can have a better advanced hunt and you can have better reporting. So this is a really good product. That's what we did for them. So what else we actually do? Oh, okay, demo. This is a reminder for myself. How much time I have? I try to talk fast so I can catch up the time.
We're spot on target. Yeah, you take your time.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, okay. So I see if I can still try to show them this. Let me see. I show my desktop. This actually comes to my attention. Come to our attention that not everyone know about it, even so it's documented. I mean, really well documented. So let's see, the demo will be basically if I log on to Office portal. Sorry, that's in Finnish. And log in. So I'm going to log on as this Kara, this user. And then next. I think I changed my password, then I retype it again and sign in. So this should ask me MFA. As you see, it did ask, right? So let me close it again. I'm going to bypass that and let's see if that works. So now I open in private browser again, but this time I'm going to push first F12. Is my F12 working? Okay, now F12 is working. If you cannot see my screen, then you can zoom in the Teams. Ben has made a really good tips in there how you can zoom it. So I am now basically, usually when you, let me see how I'm now in here. Yeah, element. So in this point, I should push Control-Shift-P, and I open this common window, and I start typing the network condition, show network condition. So in here, you will see in the lower part, if you can see in the bottom part here, there's a network condition. So in this place, basically, user agent is the thing I wanted to show. If I make the checkbox away, and if I'm now going to choose, for example, Android mobile, for example, like this, just like that. And then now I go back to try login again. Office. I hope this works. And I sign in again. Log in with the same user. And then next, I type my password and sign in. So it doesn't ask me MFA anymore. So what is the problem in here? I mean, is it a hack? Absolutely not. This is actually not a hack. It's documented. So this is my conditional access settings. And basically, it's because admin has configured that wrong. And this is something that we should not do as an admin. So here I have this demo MFA that I'm going to show. What happened here, I have configured for this group and Kara is in this group. This one is okay. Problem is condition. Condition, I have configured device platform. And device platform, I have configured only for Windows. That's usually thinking that, okay, yeah, I don't have any mobile in manage. I don't really need it. And only thing I'm managing now is Windows. So I choose Windows platform. And then I choose grant and allowed if have MFA. And this is wrong. Microsoft has documented device platform is only for block. It's only for block condition or if for compliance. So if you're going to choose anything from device platform here, Android, iOS, I don't know why I still have Windows Phone there, Windows, Mac OS, and then in grant, you should use block, or then you should use this required device to be marked as compliant. That's the thing. Is it any useful?
Yeah, that's
so
really, really good.
So I don't know if everyone already know it. So I was thinking this is something that I should show. So go back to my slide when you are here, so I can still show this one. I don't really need to switch anything anymore. So basically, that's all for today. I am right on time.
Wow, you've been busy.
Yeah.
That's
well, I try.
That's a lot of work to get through in a few months. Well done.
Yeah, they had a lot of things going on, and even with the Teams project, they also have some Teams project going on, and we have to do everything. Hurry! It's like they bumping us every day. Is this ready? When can we do the Windows 10 upgrade? And when do we have the new Office? And when do we have the Teams? And VPN is not working, so multitasking.
And there's so many pieces to the puzzle, isn't there? Because you make a decision on one aspect of the technology, and that has an impact on something else. So you have to make sure everything's balanced, don't you? It's like a big Jenga set.
Yeah, well, that is I think that's the most challenging deal with big companies, because they can have multiple projects happening in the same time. And between projects, it will be different project manager, different consultants, different specialists. And between projects, sometimes they don't talk. And we even have a project was totally busted. There's a customer that they're supposed to do VPN rollout, and they were supposed to move from their old direct, what was this? Old forest to our own forest, and they supposed to like moving to our tenant, but then they want to use Teams, and then they start taking Teams in use, and totally busted another project. They're supposed to move the device to another tenant, so it was all messy. So now they end up thinking that are they going to do a tenant migration, or are they going to do some trust relation between the old domains, and how are they going to use config manager? It's just messy. I think this whole thing making everything messy.
And then you mentioned also, which is a big consideration, if somebody's got ADFS as well, that's a big piece of the jigsaw to have to, understand, is it fit for purpose? Do I have to consider getting rid of ADFS and moving to either password hash or pass-through authentication? They're big chunks of work on their own, aren't they? Let alone have to consider it as part of a Windows
for this customer, what I was talking earlier in this user case, and they adopted cloud like almost 10 years ago when just comes to the Asia and everything. And in the moment, Microsoft recommendation is that you have all your resource in one tenant, and you have the user account in another tenant. So that's how they build. So they have two tenants. And and then they have the ADFS. And I asked, what is that even for? No, they don't know. So I said, do you really need to have that? We don't have time to think that. They said they don't have time to think that right now. And then also about like their PKI. The PKI is a bit old. It's 2008. And so everything's a bit old. And that's why I'm a bit hesitate that am I going to push them forward to the cloud in this particular moment, or should I just only focus to fix the current problem first, like doing some preparation?
I mean, I think ADFS is one of those things that if you adopted, the hybrid early on, where ADFS was one of the only options, it was kind of a very specialist area, isn't it? When you look at all the different claims that were required, and maybe companies installed ADFS and it was very complicated, so they've left it, and now they're looking at other ways of authentication, directly with the cloud, using either password hash sync or pass-through authentication. And the ADFS piece it just seems like this beast they don't want to touch because it's complicated and it's working, so let's just leave it. But
yeah, exactly.
Interesting. I mean, I love
they are moving the email box from on-prem to cloud, and then also adding some complication. So I didn't even want to touch anything of the ADFs in this moment.
It was I really like the tip as well on the conditional access, where people can change the user agent string. So that's a really good one to watch for when you're doing conditional access policies. Really, really good to call that one out, because I think a lot of people will think they're applying.
We post the Microsoft documentation link in here. I think actually I have that in my PowerPoint, so you will get that.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. It's a really interesting session.
Okay.
You need a holiday.
Thank you.
Sounds like you need a holiday somewhere. There's a lot of work. It's cool. I've been keeping on the chat. I haven't seen any questions pop up. Does anybody want to raise a hand to ask Sandy something while she's here? Cool. Well,
Thank you.
if you feel like you want to, say pop it in there or shout it on Twitter, and we'll get back to you. I know,
Okay.
some way.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Bye.
Sandy. Good to see you. Thanks for joining
I
us.
will be still hang out here if there's some question I can answer. I will still answer that.
Bless you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that was an excellent session. Well, I'm learning so much. It's really good for me as well. Okay, let's see. I think we have Donna next. Are you with us, Donna?
I am. Good
How
morning.
Are you?
Oh, not too bad.
Good. I must apologise. I'm going to let everybody know that I messed up with the scheduling. You know, when we're looking at today, I didn't fully appreciate the time zone that everybody was in. So Donna is up at 5 a.m. To help us today. So I'm sorry, and we're very grateful that you got up so early to be with us today. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's no big deal. And yeah, I probably should have done my due diligence and actually looking at what I was agreeing to before I said, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. No problem.
No, you're cool. You're cool. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. You're going to be talking to us about Windows Virtual Desktop.
That is the plan.
Awesome.
Where is there's screen 2?
This really interests me because this is an area that I have not done a lot of work in. So I'm going to be a very captive audience on this session.
Okay.
That's cool.
So some of this is a little simplified. There's a lot of material to cover when you can get into Windows Virtual Desktop, although it's a fairly simple solution. There's some complexities which we'll get into. I've been working with WVD since it was in pre-release, and even with it being less than a year old, this product really has made some pretty impressive leaps and bounds in the feature offerings. And so it's pretty fun and exciting technology that can absolutely help out your work from home deployments. So what I want to talk about here, we've got, where's my move the button? There it is. Come on, move my next slide. There it goes. So here's what I'm trying to cram in here into my 45 minutes. We're going to talk about what WVD actually is, because there's some misconceptions out there. I'm going to look at the topography of WVD and how that's laid out between your on-premises infrastructure and Azure, and the prerequisites that we're going to need. Since this is more of a work from a home type discussion, we're going to look at the user experience, what your end users can actually expect, what it's going to look like for them. I'm going to go spend some time on a basic deployment, and I get the idea of the anatomy of a WVD deployment with its assignments, those types of things. Kind of briefly cover the user profiles of FS Logics, and then we're going to touch on some of the more advanced things that aren't specifically WVD, but are an almost absolute must if you're going to go down this route. So how did we end up with WVD in the first place? Well, very simply, this really started way back, almost 20 years now, with Terminal Server, which gave us a virtual desktop. There was no real central management. You're connecting into a server desktop, but hey, you could get your workers all crammed onto one box. Everyone's happy. And in 2008, we got remote desktop services, which gave us more of a centralized management. I think that was an MMC snap-in type console, but hey, it was better than absolutely nothing. Remote desktop services introduced some of the topography that known to we now have today. So we have our web access server, gateways. We've got the connection broker, which is really the core component. And then in 2012, where they cleaned up that UI and made some tweaks. And then today we've got Windows Virtual Desktop. So really, what is WVD? Well, when we break it down, It's a service that's hosted in Azure that can provide desktops on Windows 10, Windows 7, and Windows Server virtual machines. On your Windows 10 and your Windows Server, you can deal with either multi-session or single. And what that means is, you've got the terms pooled and personal. So in a pooled, where you have your multi-users, you're going to have many users logging into one box. Where it's personal, it's this person, it's a one-to-one. As a side note, Windows 7 is only personal. The value add for supporting Windows 7 is if you do throw Windows 7 workloads in there, you get free extended security updates with Windows 7. So if you've got those legacy apps or those app admins that have just flat out refused to modernize, well, you don't have to necessarily pay for the ESUs if you fork with that over to Azure, but you still have to pay for that consumption. But that's one of the selling points as well. The service handles for you your web access and your connection brokering, so you really don't have to do anything from a WVD implementation of setting up those roles anymore, which as a consultant that really enjoyed that part. It's kind of a bummer because I don't get to roll that out anymore. It's there as soon as you push the button, and since this is all internet based, there's no real need for a gateway, which is actually really handy. So prerequisites, what do we need? Well, we're going to need Active Directory, and we're going to need all the Active Directories. So we either need to use either a traditional on-prem, Active Directory that we all know and love, or if we're an organization that doesn't have an AD environment because they're born in the cloud or for whatever reason, Microsoft has made available a service called Azure Active Directory Domain Services, which spins up an AD environment for you, so you can do your Active Directory type of things, your GPOs and ADUC and all that kind of fun stuff. But either or, you need one of those. And you absolutely need Azure Active Directory. The difference being is your machine authentication for your session host is being handled through Active Directory, and your user authentication is happening through the Azure Active Directory. If you have an on-prem Active Directory environment, then you're going to need a site-to-site VPN, or you're going to need ExpressRoute. Depending on your technical needs and your budget, either or can fill that niche. It just kind of depends on what you need. We're going to need to have a virtual network established in Azure so we can make sure that our endpoints or our session hosts are getting proper DNS. They got their IP addresses. They can access any type of backend resources. We may need storage for user profiles, depending on if we're even going to need user profiles. That again kind of comes out to the scenarios and what we're going to be deploying. And we're also going to need user licensing. Topographically, this diagram is pretty simplistic, but it's going to get the idea. So in the bottom right, we've got our user connecting into the environment. And they're going right into Azure Platform as a Service. And in the Platform as a Service, Microsoft has given us our web access and our connection brokering and the gateways and the load balancing and the management plane. It's all there out of the box. As soon as you go to the WVD section in the Azure portal, it's all there. Connected out of the on-prem, we can have our Active Directory if we have any backend services that our users need to access. So if we think some type of server-side database or something along those lines, that can be connected into the on-prem. And then in the Azure IaaS is where we're going to host our virtual machines. From a licensing perspective, and I just stole this right from that URL because there are people that make a comfortable six-figure living trying to understand Microsoft licensing, and I am not one of them. But if you have any of these, you're essentially golden. With the Windows 10 and the Windows 7, These are more of your newer type licensing packages. If you only need to do your traditional Windows Server based session hosts, you can use an existing RDS cal, which makes it kind of nice if you're not really, if that's what you need to do and you already have RDS cals, hey, you're good to go. From a cost perspective, it can vary greatly. This is a resource consumption based billing, so it's going to vary greatly depending on the type of virtual machine, the resources we allocated to it, the number of machines that we have, if they've been cycled up, if they're powered on or they're not. There are costing calculators available. If you can kind of ballpark what you need to kind of just get that general budget, that may help you out to try and figure out what it's actually going to run you. And since this is a work from home central type discussion, where's the value in WVD? Well, you can conceptually, you can essentially treat your end user devices essentially just as a thin client. You don't really have to worry about deploying the applications and deploying all of the stuff to them. You can just, here's your access. If you're managing systems with Endpoint Manager, and this can be a very easy way of getting your apps and services to your end users without having to go through all those types of complicated hoops. You can just all you would really need to deploy if you're going to use the FAT client. We could use Intune to push that out, or if we're going to use the web browser, we don't even need that. If we're using Autopilot, we can quickly provision devices. We can just simply use WFB. Since we're not having these complicated builds pushing out and how they're connected, you can give your end users a very simple device, which as a systems admin, having a simple device to manage makes your life easier. Cool thing too is we're not worried at all about users' VPNs because they're connecting right into Azure. The end user experience is actually really nice, especially if you use the FAT client, which is my preferred mechanism. Again, your mileage is going to vary on that. Instead of having to worry about your application versions across your entire estate, all you need to do is update it at your hosts. And so you update it centrally, you're done. You don't have to worry about are these users connected, and you're not that worried about all that version creep that you can end up having as you're trying to manage thousands of devices. It's really easy and quick to deploy new resources. And the solution is very scalable. So if we're going to be onboarding or doing any type of acquisitions during this, it's really easy just to build what you need. From a terminology perspective, once we start diving into this, I'm going to want to talk about some of the terms that we're going to see. So we're going to have a workspace, which is it's a grouping in a hierarchy of session hosts and your assignments. You're going to have your session host, which is the actual computer that your users are going to log into. And a host pool or session host pool is a grouping, a cluster, a farm, whatever term you want to use, of identically configured session hosts. And that's one of the critical things. If you've not really, gotten far into client virtualization, it is crucial that you have identically configured session hosts. And over time, it gets more and more challenging to ensure that configuration. But it's just one of the natures of the beast. Within the console, we're going to have application groups, which is where we're going to assign users. And kind of just simply when we're looking at what we're deploying out to the users, actually deploying configman, consultant by trade, really. So deploy is still that term that I use, but really it's assigning. But you've got a desktop and an app. So if we're going to deploy a desktop, really they're getting a full desktop, a full Windows experience. But if we're going to just do applications, if you've worked with Remote App in the past, or Zen App, or one of those types of things, the user is instead just getting the UI to the application. from a user experience perspective, what are our options? Well, we've got an HTML5 web portal, which is by far the easiest to deploy because, you know, when Windows opens up or whatever, you know, it's there. You don't have to worry about, you know, managing, you know, the client version. There are some limited features or that may be a deal breaker. And if they're not, you know, web browser's pretty awesome. Unfortunately, mobile OSs are not supported. So, you know, if most of your fleet is going to be on Android or, you know, iOS, or your mobile OS is not going to be supported. So they're going to have to fall back to the client app. So the client app supports, you know, your major operating systems. It also supports Teams. You can install it in a per user or per system, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. The cool thing is the per user doesn't require admin rights, which is handy because this client is being updated constantly. I'm constantly getting toast notifications from the new RDP client. Hey, there's a new version. There's a new version. And as a side note too, that it's not going to be, you know, the traditional MTTSC, MSTSC. That's what it is. Microsoft Terminal Services Client. You know, your RDP, your traditional. There is a discrete special app used for WVD. If you're using the client app, I think one of the coolest features is it will go ahead and publish for you automatically, right to your users, you know, to start. Is everything that's been assigned to them. So if you're deploying applications and, you know, desktops and the end user has a fat client, it's all right there and start. They don't have to go into, you know, a separate portal to log out. They just click Excel or their desktop or whatever line of business app, and it connects and goes through the process. So enough blathering. Let's go ahead and let's go have a poke about here. So can I minimize this without? Yeah, we'll do this mildly painful. Let's see. I minimize that. No. Come on, where did it go? There it is. I'm just going to go ahead and end my slideshow. So hey, look at that. We're in Windows Virtual Desktop. So what does this look like for the end user? And so we can go to a URL, rdweb, wvd, microsoft.com, ARM. There is a shortened link, which I don't remember off the top of my head. User gets their traditional, you know, Microsoft Azure prompts, and they get their assignments. Now, you just have to bear with me. When I built my session hosts, I did not use very good VMs because VMs can be expensive, especially if you forget that they're running. Yeah, getting that surprise bill kind of stinks. And so I've used kind of underpowered machines. But what your users can do is we can go ahead and just click on our application here that we want. And in this case, we're going to use good old Paint. I'm going to go ahead and say allow. So as a side note here too, you're going to notice that I'm going to get a prompt even though I've already been authenticated in. Oops. Come on. I love live demos. And while that's going, let me try and kick off a desktop as well. See if some of these hosts should be awake. Here we go. So if you want a single sign-on approach, if you're using Azure AD Connect, you're out of luck. There'll always be the second authentication. It's really not the end of the world. But if you really do absolutely need single sign-on, you have to be connecting in with ADFS. And then again, here's this connection. Am I spelling it right? It's a little early. Now it's kind of fun too, if you kind of wanted to see what's going on behind the scenes. If you hit that show detail, what that should do is present the actual connection is what's going on in the background. So we can see here, I've got my line of business app here, and you get this nice little handy taskbar. So you can have all of your WVD sessions are all, you know, in one. And this is working just fine. So as you can see, I'm using this high-powered programs all running right on Azure. Or we're going to have a full desktop. Now, as a side note, with your full desktops, while it absolutely you can get to a desktop here and deploy those out quickly, it's not just push the button and you're ready to go. As you can see, I've done absolutely no configuration on this. And I've got options to shut down and restart. And if I do that, it will absolutely shut down or restart the entire session host, even if you got 100 people logged into it. So if you do plan on deploying desktops, you do need to spend the time to curate the user experience and lock down as much stuff as possible, because this is a shared environment. If somebody blows up the machine, well, then everybody suffers. You can use GPO. These, you know, this is not a you know, big surprise to those who've been managing RDS for, you know, a while. But you can lock all of this stuff down. But that's one of those design things, and it's kind of one of the reasons why I really like going with the app route, because there's no start menu or start button here for my users to monkey about with. So that's with the web client. But what does it look like if we're going to use the FAT client? Well, FAT client, I have actually got here. Oops. When you open it up, when the user opens up for the first time, they'll have to authenticate. It will then pull down, you know, the resources that they have access to, which again, I've got, you know, the applications that I've published, and that's getting pulled up. If you do need multi-monitor support, the FAT client absolutely supports that. The web client does not. Maybe a deal breaker for some, not for others, just more of an FYI. And then, as we can see here too, the applications that we've launched through WVD get their own discrete icon down here, which is really cool. And there's a little green RDP or icon on top to show you that that's actually a discrete session. If we also go ahead and open up Start, you know, we can see here's my applications that have been recently added. Now, where does Microsoft stick that? Yeah, so based off of the name of your workspace, that's all my stuff right here. So you can call your workspace, you know, line of business apps or company name, whatever. You can just instruct your users to go ahead and go into there, and hey, there's all their stuff. So they don't have to go and, you know, to jump through hoops to go through a portal. It's just right there. It makes it really easy to use. And so, you know, from an end user experience perspective, I think Microsoft has done a really good job of you know, making this not terribly painful at all for your end users. Go ahead and close that out. I ended up connecting into Paint through, when I logged in to the other one, it pulled Paint up on my other screen. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel that because I don't care. And I'm going to go ahead and close out my basic desktop. Also, there's a little privacy thing too. When you log in for the first time, there's a GDPR. You get that disclaimer here as well. So I'm going to go hop back into PowerPoint, and let's see here. Let me go ahead and kick this back, and this is going to start me back at the beginning. Where was I? Get past MC Hammer. Where are you, MC? There he is. All right. So that's what it looks like from the end user's perspective. What is this going to look like from the admin's perspective? Depends, largely. Now, if you've played around with WVD in the past prior to the spring release, it was pure PowerShell, with the exception of, you know, community tools. And in the really early days, the ARM templates largely didn't work very well. That's not the case anymore. And Microsoft has done a really good job of making this pretty darn simplistic to deploy. There's a wizard, which makes things easy. If we want to get into automation, we can save our templates. And as we get into, the scale sets, those other, more in-depth things, you'll start getting into working with those. If we only need to do like a basic desktop, if we just need to give your users, a desktop in Office, those images, are already available. We can also create a custom image if we need to, and we can do things in a custom image like, install our line of business apps. We can curate the user experience either through, making registry changes, local policy changes. We can install FSLogix if we're going to be doing that, because that doesn't get installed natively. Even though there's a lot of underpinning there, FSLogix doesn't work out of the box with WVD. With a basic deployment, though, again, the emphasis is definitely on basic. You don't have any type of real dynamic host provisioning, which for most organizations is, a problem. If you're really just going to have, one or two hosts up all the time and, users connect in, awesome. What you do get out of the box, though, when you're going through the wizard is you can tell the virtual machine what time of day to shut off. There isn't one to tell it what time to turn back on. There's an automation you have to build to do that. But if you just want to have things just turn off and you can go turn things back on, yeah, that's about what you get out of the box. And profile management is really optional. And by profile management, what do I mean? Well, that's going to be user settings, documents, those types of, USMT type of things. There's no control of that really out of the box, and that's really going to fall back to FSLogix. But if you're going to just deploy like a front end, to your users, and then that connects back in. If you don't really care about user settings and what they're saving to their desktop, then you don't have to get into profile management at all. Which again is why I like going down the app route, because if it's consistent out of the box and you're not worried about saving anything really custom, cool. Yeah, I'm a big fan of simplicity. So, since I kind of just highly touched on the FSLogix thing here, what is that? So it was a company that Microsoft acquired. It was last year, and it's actually a really cool solution. If you've used RD or RDS 2012, you had your user profile disks. FSLogix kind of does the same thing, but does it a completely different mechanism. So what it does is it creates a VHDX file for each user. And when the user logs in, the FSLogix service detects the user's logging in, goes to the file share, pulls the VHDX over and attaches it. But it does it seamlessly. So the user isn't going to see, here's your C drive and here's my D drive where I save my stuff. It's seamless. The user has no idea that any of this, to coin a phrase, jiggery pokery is happening in the background. And it's actually really slick and it works really, really well. To control FSLogix, we can manage it either by using GPO. We can do that through local policy if we wanted to go down that route, or you can also assign it through registry keys. Personally, I like using GPOs, but that's just me. What you are going to need, though, is you're going to need to have some type of file storage. And that which one you use is largely up to you. If you've got file servers, cool, you can use that, because all this needs is UNC share or an SMB share. Your whack, if you will. If you're going to go down the file server route, okay, things to keep in mind: if that file server is on-prem, then your user profiles are going to be whizzing up and down the VPN and pay for that privilege. So you're probably going to want to host that in Azure. You're going to want to host it in Azure. But if you're going to do that, then realistically, if you're going to make this a truly highly available deployment, you're going to need to have clusters. So now you're looking at multiple machines. multiple machines means more spend. So what I would recommend doing is using Azure Files, because Azure Files gives you that SMB functionality that you need, but you don't have to worry about building all that redundant infrastructure in the back end just to host those files. You can also use NetApp, Azure NetApp files. I've not used it. I've not configured it. I've not had a need to. So, that one may make sense if that's part of your infrastructure. If you're starting this off from scratch, just go to Azure Files. Again, this is not installed by default whatsoever. So if you want to use FSLogix, you're going to either need to deploy that out before you have a user login, or you're going to need to bake it into your image. It's a free public download. If you Google download FSLogix, you'll get a Microsoft web page. In the second paragraph, there's a sentence that says you can download it here. And here is a link. So with that all being said, what does that look like from the in the management plane? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. And my slideshow again. So if you've gone into the Azure portal and looked for WVD, well, you get this. And it looks pretty simplistic, and it is. Now, some of you may have been even tempted to go ahead and hit the button, and it may or may not have worked. So what do we have here? Well, from a hierarchy perspective, again, we've got our workspace. And, if we want to look at that, it's really, a larger, just a bundling of the full resources that we're making available to a subset of users. You can have multiple workspaces. You don't have to cram them all in one. Depending on what makes sense from a logical perspective. Maybe you've got a business unit in North America, and you've got a business unit in Europe, and a business unit in Asia that you have completely different configurations and applications for. Then it would make sense to have a workspace for each. And that way, your North American resources and have access to what they need. Same thing with Europe and Asia. From your application groups, this is where you're going to be making your assignments. So like if we look at my applications that I had assigned where I had 7-zip and Paint, we can look at assignments, and then, hey, here's me. And then we can also look at the applications. If we wanted to add an application to that list, what's really nice is if you go ahead, you can go ahead and plug in a file path. So if you're making an application available that doesn't really register there, you can absolutely do that. But if you want to be lazy, it also scans your installed applications. So I can go ahead and say, oh yeah, I'm going to go ahead and make let's go ahead and make Excel available. And then if you need to do additional command line arguments, you can. You've got some flexibility here. And then we can go ahead and save that. And so now, now I've just made Excel available. And then I think I should be able to, I've assigned that out to that as well. So if I'm not mistaken, if I go here, can I do a refresh? Let's see, I'm gonna close that. Let's see, did I do that right? Come on. And so really with a click of a button, and what, less than 15 seconds, I've now provisioned an application out to everybody. I didn't have to upload the content, wait for the replication to happen, make a deployment, wait for clients to check in. Boom, I just did it. It's really, really cool. All right, so that's that's what we have with our application groups. From a desktop's perspective, by default, when you build a host pool, it just defaults to desktop. And that's why you're going to see here that applications is grayed out, because within that host pool, you can only do either or. You can't mix and match, just so you know. So that's cute and all. What are hosts and host pools? So, I've got 2 host pools set up here. I've got the desktop, and I've got my one that I'm doing my applications with. So let's go ahead and see. Let's go ahead and look at my the ones that I have apps, because I'm actually logged in. So we can see here that I've got, just from a high level here, I've got an active session. That's me, as I'm the only user here. The applications that I've got deployed out, and I have one application group. I can actually look at the session hosts. Let's see. Hey, there's an active session here. I can go ahead and look at that. If you go down to the host level itself, you can find users and you can send them a message. You can boot them. What's nice too is you've got drain mode. So if you know that you need to take a host down for maintenance, if you enable drain mode, what that does is it prevents new user sessions from happening, from logging in. So as people go ahead and log off for the day, it prevents new ones from coming in, so you can gracefully do what you need to do. As a side note, what you may have noticed here, especially if you're dealing with users, is, hey, there's no shadow. Well, you're absolutely right. There's no button here for that. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just natively it's not there. So explain that. Sure. If you as an admin are on the network, so you're VPN'd in, or you're working from home, or hell, you're even connected in through WVD, you can use the shadow feature from the traditional RDP client. And I don't remember the command line argument off the top of my head, but there's a switch that you can put in there and plug in a parameter so it knows exactly who it's going to shadow, and that works. But the reason why this isn't in here as a feature is because you as an admin may be working from home and not on the VPN. And if you don't have a way to route to the session host, it's going to fail spectacularly. So just keep that in mind, as if you're rolling this out, you do have the ability to shadow users, as just not natively in here, like a good chunk of stuff that you may actually need. What else can we do? Oh, users. This is kind of handy as well. So if you needed to go find, user so-and-so has opened up a ticket and they need help. Okay, well, we can go ahead and pull them up, and we can see what we've actually assigned to them. And we can also see what sessions that they have, if they're actually active or not. Can boot them if you need to. We can also send them a message, and I'm going to go and hit OK. And then I'm going to just try and see. All right. Crap. Let me try this again. Let me go ahead and cancel. Sorry, I've got Paint shut on another monitor. Drag this up just so you can see what this looks like. All right, let me go ahead and send that critical message again. Doink. Now, what you can do with that, besides just bug your friends and send them dumb messages, if you get into a larger orchestration process where you're going to be shutting down a host at a given time, you can go ahead and notify all your users that, hey, this action is going to happen, or hey, save your work. This host is time bombing. So that functionality, is there. I don't think I'm going to have a whole lot of time to delve into this particular component, but it's something that I want to make you guys aware of. Is there's this function here called your registration key. And what does that mean? Well, if you go ahead and build a session host with the wizard, and where did overview? Yeah, if you go ahead and click this shiny blue button here, you walk through the wizard, and then hey, you got a bunch of hosts. What actually happens in the background on the Windows 10 box itself, it's not really aware of WVD. There are 2 applications that need to be installed. There's a like a bootstrapper essentially, and then an agent. How the session host knows which host pool it's going to be a part of is this registration key process. So what you can do is you can generate a key, and then in one of those WVD applications, you pass that key to the application. So once it boots up and goes, hey, I'm a WVD session host. Wait, who am I talking to? I've got this registration key. Hey, Azure, who does this go to? Oh, this goes over here. Great. And that's how it makes that connection. Once you start getting into the scale sets, that becomes a very important thing. If we're just going to deploy solely through the ARM and through Wizard, you don't have to worry about that. It handles it for you. But if you're going to be doing this through PowerShell, scale sets, or manually, that's going to be part of something you're going to absolutely need to know about. So I know I'm starting to run just a touch short on time. So let me go ahead and do this. Instead of jarring back and forth, I'm just going to go ahead and cheat. All right, so where were we? So if we're going to do more of an advanced deployment, oh, you know what? Let me show you something else here real quick. Maybe I minimize that. If I go into, I just want to show you what Azure Files looks like real quick. File shares. So I went ahead and set this up, and I've got my FS logics pointing back over here. I've configured it with group policy, and there's only 3 things that you really need in order to start setting this up in the policy, and you can do it through registry. That's a totally cromulent process. All you need to tell FS logics is 1, to enable it, 2, what the file share is, and 3, how big to make your minimum file size, and that's it. So you don't have to get crazy with it. What we can see here, you know, I'm starting to go down, you know, down the path. Here's my profile. Here's my VHD file, and this is all tied to SSID. You can also control how this looks through policy. There's a ton of FS logics that you can control through policy, and really just by saying that all you need to do is just turn it on and tell it where to go. That greatly oversimplifies the functionality. There's a ton of things that FS logics does around Office sessions, OneDrive. It's definitely worthy of its own discrete session entirely. Just don't have the time to scratch the surface into it. But yeah, again, Azure Files is pretty awesome for doing user profile disks. So anyway, where's the button? Oh, come on. All right, so from an advanced deployment, what do I mean by that? Well, what you probably noticed is it's cool. Okay, now I know I can deploy applications. I can deploy desktops. I know I need to do some curating on the desktop side. But you mentioned earlier that this is all resource. And what if I don't want to have my entire WVD farm chugging away, you know, costing not pennies a month, when I have no users? Well, that's where we start getting into this advanced, because this functionality here to control, you know, when things come up and when things go back down is not a part of WVD. It's a part of Azure. And so it's not necessarily straightforward. And I'm not really going to be able to do a full demo of these, but I'm going to highlight the real relevant bits. So you can use Azure Automation Account to do some of this type of work. And what this is going to allow you to do is essentially either turn on or turn off session hosts based off of time. So if you know that everybody quits work at 5 o'clock, cool. Okay, well then we can go ahead and say, okay, at 5:30 turn off these hosts. And we're going to leave 1 there just in case we got that 1 person. Or you can also do it based off of CPU or sessions. But that's just turning them on and off. It's just about that. And how to build that is not terribly straightforward whatsoever. Neither one of these really is. My preferred mechanism is a VM scale set. And what is the scale set? So what we can do is we can build a machine template, essentially. And we can say here, at a very bare minimum, we need to have one session host. And then if you match this criteria, go ahead and build me another one, and then another one, and then another one. And then you can also have teardown criteria. So if we're now only hitting so much CPU, okay, destroy that machine, destroy that machine, destroy that machine. And the reason why I prefer that to the automation is since you're building new each time, you're not worried about configuration creep or drift. That's the term, configuration drift, because you're building it as you go and you're destroying it when you're done. You can also use your scale sets to go ahead and update your image. And so if you want to, instead of having to really worry about, deploying actual updates and scheduling your maintenance time through like Config Manager, which can handle that, just upload a new image into the scale sets, and then hey, it's going to use the new one. So there's a lot of flexibility in the scale sets. Also, the setup is extremely confusing on that as well. Not to scare you off on them, they're fantastic. What are the relevant bits to this? So once you go through setting up the automation, you can provide these parameters here. Let's see, and which were the excluded VMs. All right, the excluded VMs, that's a very important component, because you're going to want to, at least in theory, leave at least one of your hosts up at all times. That way, whoever needs to log in, there's always something. So we can assign that. We can tell it, what time of day to stop if we want to do that. There's an auto start in here somewhere, and I'm not seeing it. Maybe it's just that I'm lacking, sufficient caffeine in my bloodstream. But we can. This is pretty much where our magic happens with setting up the auto turn on and turn off. It's not pretty, but again, that may get you in the ballpark. From a scale set, the relevant bits here, come on. All right. When you go through and build a scale set, we can define our criteria. And so what's fun here is we can say here's initial instance count. So that's how many machines we're going to have built. And if you want to kick the tires on this at home, you can say your initial instance count is going to be 0. And that's what it's going to build. It's going to build you nothing. And once it goes ahead and builds it, makes the connection, you can actually see it in WVD, but there's no actual machines running. So when you log in, you can see it actually build your machine. It's kind of fun. But we can provide it, how many are the minimum amount of session hosts, and it's VMs, because you can use this for darn near anything. But your minimum number of resources, your virtual machine session hosts to have. Also can define your maximum. That way you don't just keep spinning them up in perpetuity. Your scale out, here's your thresholds to hit off of once you've hit that criteria. So in this particular case, if our CPU is hitting 75% and it's been that way for 10 minutes, build me a new VM. And that way you have some other place for users to go to. And then the scale in, which is collapsing, is if you've been at a threshold of X amount of percent, go ahead and tear one down. Now, it's also important too, is you don't necessarily want to use the default. Generally you want to use this newest VM. Because if you think about it, as you're building new virtual machines, as users log in, you probably don't want it to automatically just, oh yeah, I'm going to pick this one at random. Oh yeah, this is the one that I've got like the most of my users log in. Sorry, users, you just lost your session. So you want to make sure that you're going to destroy the newest one, because in theory that should have the least amount of users logged in. Why this is complicated, if you go through this whole wizard here, essentially what is missing, and there's only one thing that's missing out of this wizard, is there is no domain join option, and domain join is an absolute requirement. So essentially what you do with this is you walk through this wizard and you save the template, and then you can there is a template that's been created mostly from the community, is how I found it, that you go ahead and actually build a new template that has everything that you need. And then what you can do is upload the parameters from the scale set template into it. So that will then populate, you know, the image that you want and all of that that criteria and all the information that it needs. And then we have the domain join option. And at that point, this thing's ready to run. So yeah, scale sets is definitely where it's at. Now, to try and simplify this, there are third-party options available. Citrix Cloud, VMware Horizons. I'm sure somebody else is out there too. The difference being is instead of using the WVD management plane with those guys give you a management plane. Your WVD session hosts still reside in Azure, and that's critical for Microsoft because that's where they're making their money on it. So if you're going to use Citrix Cloud, you don't have to worry about any of that WVD management plane that I've gone through. You can use Citrix to manage all of that stuff and handle all of those scaling outs and assignments and whatnot, but the hosts still live in Azure. Same thing with with VMware. It's definitely worth mentioning. There is a solution from Nerdio, and I'm not a huge fan of paid third-party services unless, you know, of course, it's, you know, somebody like, you know, a Recast or a Patch My PC. Nerdio is awesome though. They have done a damn fine job of building a good UI that is easy to use. Now, what's interesting though is they really haven't done a whole lot of here's new code from them. What they've done though is they've taken all these little pieces of features that Azure has distributed all about, you know, itself, and has tied it all together. So, you know, you can do your scaling up and scaling down, and here's a little handy UI that allows you to do that. Okay, cool. That feature was there all along, but it's just not in that main window. So Nerdio is definitely cool if you've got the seat count to justify it. There is a minimum user count of like 250 users per month. So if you're running a mom and pop and you've only got, you know 100 users, well, you're gonna be paying for 250. So Nerdio may not count. But if you have enough users, it's definitely worth considering because the stuff that they've built is really slick. Of course, we can't discount community tools. We all love our community tools here. So WVD admin, I have not really had a chance yet to kick the tires on this. I've been on vacation last couple of weeks, and I stumbled across this right before I went on vacation. And yes, I actually said this line when I actually clicked a button and started playing with it. Oh my God, just look at that interface. Because this free tool gives you the ability to create and build images, to do your scale sets. It's just an absolutely amazing amount of features in one UI. So it is. I can't wait to sit and dig into it, especially to like preserving a reference image. If you do a custom image natively through Azure/WVD, once you capture it, that virtual machine it's static. This allows you to preserve the reference image. There's so much cool crap in there, and I'm not kidding. That is a really cool solution. So if you don't want to, pay a third party, go snag WVD admin and kick the tires on it because it's pretty awesome. There's also an auto scaling script, and the name is escaping me because it's still early. I've got his name a couple more slides out. Patrick Kohler, I think so. It has created a solution that consolidates all of that the automation account process into a single spot to make things a lot easier if you want to go down that route instead of using the scaling scripts. So check those both out. Probably make your life a ton easier. I'm assuming we're making these decks available to the group after, so I've left a couple of links in here. This first one goes to Sandy's post she did last year on building an Azure site-to-site if you want to kick the tires using routing and remote access services, which there's just something that just tickles me about using some really old piece of software to drive something brand new. It's actually my VPN is using RAS. It works just fine. So if you want to try it out, definitely check out Sandy's post there. How to use FSLogix and set that up and set up Azure files to make that work. There's a post there. In all its glorious detail on both of these part 1 and part 2, those posts cover how to set up the scale sets and how to set up the Azure automation account. And there's just a link to WVD admin. And because we're all on Twitter, all of us should be on Twitter. Like if you're not on Twitter, seriously, get on Twitter. Here's a really good group of people here to follow. WVD Logic's Patrick Kohler. That was the name that I had forgotten. He's making lots of posts. And actually, when I started learning, I followed his guides on how to do the scale sets. That's great. RDS for you. Scott Manchester, which owns WVD. Christian, I believe, is an MVP or works for Microsoft. I don't remember. Freak is a RDS WVD MVP. The WVD community is a community of WVD nerds. So they're, aggregating and doing their own thing. And then Marcel is the MVP and the genius behind the WVD admin. So if you want to get into WVD and you got Twitter, go ahead and follow those folks as well. And with that, I think I'm going to call that time.
Wow, amazing. Pretty cool stuff, eh? WVD.
I think so.
There's a couple of questions around licensing for
sure,
which we all, sometimes cringe at, around FSLogix. So with the licenses for WVD, so you have an M365 E3 or E5 or others, would you tend FSLogix be included under those SKUs? Do you know?
Yes. Essentially, if you got the licensing to use WVD, you got the licensing to use FSLogix. I think it's just, and again, I'm not one of those licensing nerds, so double check me here, but I'm pretty sure that if you own Windows 10 in an enterprise fashion, you own FSLogix. I mean, that's a lot of various Windows 10s. And the cool thing too is you don't have to use FSLogix. You can use FSLogix even for for physical devices. It's just policy and an agent. There is the MSI app attach, which should be coming out at some point, which is an FSLogix driven mechanism to deploy applications. It's still in preview, but I'm sorry, I just went on a tangent.
No, that's cool. That's really cool. I mean, I guess the takeaway for me really is how quickly at scale you can present desktops and applications to users.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing we heard earlier in the year, when Microsoft used an example, I think they spun up over 20 or 30,000 desktops in a few days for their employees. So I think that's one of the really cool things. If people are looking at this solution and haven't looked at WVD before, and they maybe ask some questions like, how do we manage those with Config Manager or Intune? Is that a question they need to ask? Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the answer is going to be largely depends on what they're trying to do. And like Config Manager is good for, you can do your patching. That's one of the prescribed mechanisms for patching your session hosts. Because you can orchestrate your maintenance windows and all that kind of fun stuff. You can deploy your applications per system. So if we need to roll out a new application out to users and we've got our entire session host farm out there, sure, we can go ahead and push out as required and the application starts getting installed automatically. Intune has a little bit less, but I know Microsoft is putting a lot of investment into management of WVD and the compliance and all that stuff through Intune. So there is that there as well. So it's definitely a question worth asking for sure.
Yeah, cool. make sure you time your maintenance windows well if you're doing updates.
Absolutely.
No, that's awesome, Donna. Thank you ever so much for that.
You're welcome. As a side note too, if anybody wants to do a further deep dive into some of those things I just kind of glossed over, a couple of weeks ago I did a dog and pony show for EEMUG. That was a 2-hour session on WVD that was recorded. When the session hits YouTube, I'll throw a link out on Twitter. But that one goes into full details of a lot of the stuff that I just didn't have time to cover. So
no, that's perfect. And it's like you said, thank you. We haven't mentioned it before, and actually we haven't asked you yet if about slide decks becoming available. Yeah, I mean, if the presenters are happy to hand those across, we'll make them available on the website for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm happy to share mine out.
Excellent. Thank you, Donna. I learned a lot from that. It's like WVD wasn't something that I've spent a lot of time with, and so I found that really helpful.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for being up so early with us as well.
Oh, that's not a problem.
Awesome. Bless you. Okay. We have a session from Leo next. Leo Darcy, are you with us?
I am.
How are you, Leo?
I'm good, thank you. Let me just change my background. Turns out that the new one.
Awesome.
There we go. Turns out that it saves your last one now, which I think's a new change.
It's good to see you, mate. Have you got a stand-up desk there?
I do, yeah.
Good for you. I've been thinking of investing in one. My bag is not getting any better the older I get.
I can highly recommend it. It's a sit stand. This one's actually a Ferner one, so
okay.
Yeah, highly recommend them.
Link in the bottom below.
Yeah, like, subscribe, comment.
Awesome. It's really good. It's really good for you to be with us today. I mean, I think your session fits in really nicely with what we've just been talking about, and kind of on the back of what Sandy was talking about as well, and that's VPN.
Yes.
So I'll hand over to you to take that away. Thank you, mate.
Lovely. So yeah, this session is kind of around what makes a secure VPN solution. So there's a lot of VPN solutions out there that work, that you can get data from your client or out on the internet into your data center, so that people are working and productive. And a lot of those have kind of gone in over the past few months. But just because it works doesn't mean it's secure. What I'm going to talk through today is some of the things that you should be thinking about around your VPN solutions, what makes it secure, so that now that you're potentially functional, how do you make this a more permanent solution? How do you make it work for the business in the long term as well as the short term? So this actually mostly came out of a document that we wrote right at the beginning of COVID, which we've called our baseline solution. And what this is it's a PDF you can get free from our website, and that takes you through a step-by-step
Yeah, hi Leo, we lost you, mate. You know, we'll just hold on a bit. We'll wait for you to come back on. That's cool. It's the nature of the business we're in, isn't it? We're so reliant on that broadband connection. And I've had to tell my children not to do any streaming today on Netflix, just in case it interrupts my feed as well. So we're cool. We'll give you a few minutes, Leo, and I'm just gonna have a look in the chat window while we're waiting for Leo to come back on, just see if you guys have asked any questions. Yeah, it says Leo looks frozen. Not so sure that's true in this heat, but very cool. Is that something anybody else has come across since they've been working from home? Is telling the kids to stop watching Netflix or YouTube for kids because you're on an important work phone call? Yeah, it's the problem, isn't it, Toby, with Norfolk broadband? So Toby Fish is a good friend of mine, and he lives in the same area, and the broadband is hit and miss where we live. So, like you say, if you have your team's meeting and you're sharing content, and the kids are watching stuff, and the wife's got a phone out, and the TV's on, suddenly everything comes to a grinding halt.
We're looking forward to the fibre to the premises coming though. I've seen that for area.
FTP, hey. We haven't got FTC yet. Or FTK, sorry. How do you spell curb in England? Is it the K or C?
You're out in the sticks though, that's what it is then. Yeah. Even
Yeah,
more of
I'm
the
blessed by living in the countryside, but broadband could be better.
At least you can get broadband living in the countryside. Come out and live where I do out here in rural Michigan.
Oh, you have to go into town for your broadband.
I have to go to town to get internet. There is no physical internet line that comes to my house. It doesn't exist. The only possible option for a physical internet connection is a old copper twisted pair, which gives me a half meg internet.
So you don't get 4G or anything?
Nope.
Wow.
The
it's not
cell
like
phone service just doesn't exist out there.
You know, like if you're not on mains water, you can dig a well. It's not the same concept with broadband, is it?
Not so much. I do have a well. The only physical connection between my house and the outside world is a power line. That's it.
Wow.
I live in the middle of nowhere.
So how do you work from home, or don't you?
I don't. I actually have a private office that is basically an 8x8 room that I rent in town.
Okay, cool. So literally, when you finish work, you can switch off when you get home.
Yeah, I can, assuming I go home, right? So, you know, if I want to play video games or, you know, or do content or anything like that, I just have to stay in the office longer.
Do you know, I think I've seen a picture of you, Jordan, with a hammock underneath your desk.
Shh, we don't talk about the hammock under the desk. Adam, I didn't hear back about the Elon Musk and the satellite from that. That was, I was hopeful. Unfortunately, it's too far north right now. It doesn't reach me this far south. However, I do have a local LTE solution. I'm having an 80-foot tall tower built in 2 weeks, and then that will have a unified air fiber access point on top of it. Should be able to get 20 megs at that point, and then the month after 100 meg.
So you're going to serve the rest of the town with broadband with that tower?
No, just me.
Wow, that's cool. That is building your own tower.
Oh, I'm not building it. I'm having the company that I'm working with to get internet to me building it. They'll come out and they'll pour concrete in 2 weeks, and then they'll come back a few days later and stack the tower.
That's amazing. Wow. You don't have to wait for Starlink.
Can't imagine
Nope.
BT do anything like that in the UK, can you, Ben?
No, quite.
And I mean, it is the only option for people who live in the area like I do out there. And I'm not the only one. There's a whole bunch of other people out there that won't be able to get it either. They still won't be able to get it unless they build their own tower. It's silly.
Wow.
I could arrange that if you send me one, Simon.
Swedish flag on top of the tower.
I guess you have plenty of Swedish flags since half of your country is of Swedish heritage. So, but otherwise, I'll send you a Swedish flag.
Well, if you're having a Swedish flag on there, you've got to have an English flag as well.
Yes, we must represent all the countries. Yes.
Yeah.
So you should have an EU flag. Oh, sorry, the UK.
Ooh.
Shots fired.
Yeah, that wasn't my decision. Happy days. I've just had a message from Leo that he's back in the room. Not literally, but I think he's got his connection back up and running. So
Yes,
cool.
sorry about that.
That's no problem, Leo. We were just talking about broadband connectivity. So
it was actually it was actually my laptop that completely locked up.
Oh, you did say you had some updates this morning come down.
Well, no, that was me wanting to update Visual Studio and then deciding maybe now's not the best time to update.
No, you're cool, mate. It's burned us all, these demo gods. So you're cool.
Yeah. The Power and Platforms baseline solution. So one of the things that so it's publicly available. It's a basic VPN solution. We put it out there to help these organizations that didn't necessarily have a VPN solution but needed one rather sharpish. And one of the things that we had to both do internally, or we had to kind of justify internally, but also kind of make public reference to, is the fact that this is a pretty quick and dirty VPN. It'll get you up and running, but it's certainly not the best VPN solution out there, simply because we wanted to make it manageable and quick to use. I think even then the document itself is in the high tens of pages, because we have gone into that level of detail in terms of what you need to click, when and why. And to do a more production grade solution, as we would typically call it, it obviously becomes much more complicated and planned, and ultimately that is why we as a company charge for that service. But one of the things that we needed to do was kind of justify and work out what this solution does do and what the solution doesn't do, and why you should be looking at improving it when you get the opportunity. So while we're talking about always on VPN as the Microsoft VPN technology, a lot of what we're talking about here is going to be relevant to any other VPN solutions and providers, and is kind of been focused on as part of people's COVID response. People have been putting in maybe not the most secure VPN solutions for a long time. So even if you do have an existing VPN solution that you've had for years, it might be worth just double checking your solution against some of these pointers. So for those of you who aren't aware, Always On VPN as technology is a Microsoft solution that takes Windows 10 and combines it with various VPN technologies and services to create a always on, as in as soon as you have an internet connection, you have a VPN connection back into the data center. Specifically, we'll also be talking about it using the Microsoft technologies of routing and remote access services and network policy server, which is kind of the Microsoft native stack, although you can integrate other backends into certain parts of this, such as Cisco ICE to replace MPS and things like that, depending on your technology preferences. So when we would typically deploy Always On VPN, we would deploy it at both the device tunnel and a user tunnel basis. So this allows the device, as soon as you kind of power on the device, you have a VPN connection, and that allows you to do things like the help desk can manage out and talk to the device without anyone logged in. It means that things like patches can be downloaded and installed before any user logs in, and it also means that a user doesn't need to be using cached credentials to log in, because there is already that connection to the domain controller. So the device tunnel is designed very much for system management and is typically locked down to that, with the user tunnel then opening up the much wider range of services that the specific user can then connect to. So in the UK, at least, the National Centre for Cybersecurity are the kind of main governmental body providing advice and security solutions for both government, but they make them available to the wider public as well. They operate the CAPS certification process, and this is a process used by government to provide accredited services for up to, I believe it's official sensitive, possibly secret in some cases, appliances and security solutions. And Microsoft actually put direct access, which is the precursor to AOVPN, and the Microsoft VPN solution through the CAPS process a couple of years ago. And what came out of that was it was approved, but based on a certain set of mitigations and user-based configurations, some of which I've included into this presentation later on. It is worth noting that the CAPS certification for the Microsoft VPN and direct access has actually lapsed, but that is more about Microsoft not being bothered about renewing it rather than any inherent weakness in the latest versions of the solution. NCSC also actually produce the they define what they would class as good IPsec security standards at that link there. And they have the concept of two main profiles. They've got the prime profile, which they state everyone should be moving towards, and that is using an elliptic curve cryptography certificate standard and related encryption algorithms. But that is, they are well aware that not every organization can move to elliptic curve at this point due to various legacy hardware and software in their environment. So they've also created the foundation profile, which is basically saying you should be using RSA 2048 certificates or better. And they believe that that will maintain security till I think it's 2024 at this point, although as they get nearer the date, they have promised to continue to review and push that date back based off of the evidence at the time. So with that kind of preamble out the way, whenever you're using a certificate-based VPN, of which any IKEv2 or most IKEv2 tunnels, SSTP, specifically AOVPN, the certificates are an integral part of the security, because if you can fake a certificate, then that is basically blowing a hole through your security mechanism. When you're talking about RSA based implementations, you should be having at least a 4096-bit root key with 2048 client certificates. That just puts the size of those keys out of practical hashing techniques. You've got to be I believe that there has been an unpractical attack up to 1024 at this point. And so you've got to be at that kind of nation state NSA level to actually afford the compute power to break anything above that. Elliptic curve cryptography is a newer standard than RSA. It is generally considered more secure, and the big advantage of elliptic curve is that you don't need to have massively large numbers of bits in your key to make it secure. So if I remember correctly, I think it's 192 bits ECC is equivalent to 2048 RSA. which makes it much quicker and easier to handle those certificates on both the client and the server side. There are compatibility issues with things like elliptic curve cryptography. Not everything can handle those kinds of certificates at this point. The main one that we find in industry is actually things like config manager doesn't fully support ECC certificates at this point, although if you look at the change logs, they are making rapid progress around improving that compatibility on that side of things. The other thing that you probably want is either a 2-tier or a 3-tier PKI. For most organizations, a 2-tier is absolutely fine. And what that means is that you have an offline root authority, and it is offline because it is literally turned off, potentially not even in your environment. It's backed up on, say, a hard disk somewhere in a vault. And that means that you can't, that root tier cannot be compromised, so that if your issuing authority, which is that 2nd tier, if that is ever compromised, you can create a new issuing authority and start issuing out those new certificates to end devices without needing to break that chain of trust and re-implement the whole of your VPN solution. And then one of the other kind of key components from the NCSC requirements is an externally published CRL, which is a certificate revocation list. So take, for example, if you have a device lost or stolen, what you can do is you can find those certificates related to that device. You can revoke them, and then if the authority is, and then whenever you're starting to use those certificates, both the client and the server should be checking to see whether the certificates that they're about to use is actually revoked. And if it has been revoked, then they treat it as an untrusted certificate, and therefore the connection won't come up. The reason why you should have it externally published as well as internally published, even though this is effectively an internal PKI, is that before your your device comes onto the VPN, it's going to want to check that its certificate is legitimate. And if you're only publishing it internally, you then have that chicken and egg scenario of you can't create a VPN because you need to check whether the certificate you're going to use for the VPN is valid. Hence, publishing it externally is considered best practice or good practice. So then we come to the VPN protocols themselves. So the 2 most common ones with always on VPN is IKE-v2 and SSTP. There are others like I think it's PPTP and LLTP, but they are both generally considered insecure and definitely should not be used. IKE-v2 is considered more secure and is considered to have the best performance. However, because of the port, it requires ports UDP 500 and UDP 4500. These are well-known VPN ports, and therefore can often or can sometimes be blocked on things like hotspots in like hotels, things like that, and therefore can be a challenge when it comes to using the device always on, always anywhere. In fact, some organizations where they offer like a free and a paid for broadband or hotspot service, often the only actual difference between the two is that they open up additional ports on the paid for version, things like the 500 and the 4500, to allow those business VPN connections to operate. On the SSTP side, you don't tend to have those issues because it's TCP 443, which is HTTPS traffic. And as most organizations or most people would consider not being able to access secure HTTP as an invalid internet connection, organizations will typically have TCP 443 open outbound. The limitations around SSTP is that you can only use the user tunnel. You can't use the device tunnel with SSTP. And I've had reports of when you're moving from like a wired to a wireless connection, you're changing from hotspot to a hotspot. SSTP can have connectivity problems around that, and it doesn't particularly like jumping between IP addresses and things like that, whereas AOVPN is more resilient to that. So authentication factors in a kind of a traditional VPN, user-based VPN scenario, you would log on to your device with your cached credentials. You then go to your VPN client of choice. You kind of hit the connect now button, and you'll get some kind of second factor of authentication, such as an RSA key or like a push notification to your phone, something like that. We generally try and avoid those kinds of scenarios when it comes to always on VPN. The main reason being is that it's not particularly needed, and the second thing is that it breaks the always on element of always on VPN, because you are then reliant on the user interacting with the VPN service before it then becomes operational. So the reason why you don't need that in quotes second factor is because you are providing multiple factors actually inherent in the device. So for example, the user and the device certificates, which is the primary authentication, should be TPM secured. So those certificate private keys are stored on the TPM chips on your device, and getting those private keys off of the TPM is theoretically or supposedly impossible, practically extremely hard. Again, moving more towards the nation state level of attacks versus someone's nicked your laptop type of attacks. The other protection you've got, especially on the device tunnel, is that NCSC always recommend that the device is protected with BitLocker with PIN, which again is backed by that TPM chip. Not all organizations decide to have a PIN on boot up, because again, that interferes with the user experience and being able to share devices between people. But that is always our recommendation, is to have that BitLocker with PIN. And then on the user tunnel side of things, you're also interacting with the you're authenticating with your user credentials, as well as that certificate, as well as that BitLocker, which means that you've got that what you know plus what you have to make it multiple factors of authentication. If you still want to go down that route of multi-factor authentication, however, you've got the ability to interface with conditional access, specifically Microsoft's MFA solution or conditional access solution, which Sandy was kind of demoing this morning. That is a fully supported solution, but I would generally recommend against going down that route, both from a complexity and from a user experience side. On to encryption. So the default encryption when you're using routing remote access with AOVPN is actually shockingly poor. As you can see at the top, it uses triple DES with a SHA-1 integrity. This can be modified, but you've got to make sure that you modify it both on the client side and on the server side. They don't do a negotiation. They just say, are you using what I'm expecting to use? And if not, then it breaks with a policy mismatch error. Now, NCSC recommends that you use encryption, an AES 128 encryption with a SHA-256 integrity and a Diffie-Hellman group of 14. Now, there's some people go, well, why aren't you using AES 256 rather than AES 128 for the actual encryption tunnel? And the reason for that is that provided that the integrity is there, AES 128 encryption is still considered secure, and therefore you're not gaining significant extra security by going to 256, while you are increasing or decreasing the performance of the tunnel itself. So you can go AES 256 for the encryption, but it is not required by any organization that I'm familiar with. In terms of traffic flow, this is the bit that can end up in hour-long debates when we're designing this for customers. The simplest option for most organizations is to split tunnel it. And that means that any traffic that you're trying to get from the client to the internet goes straight to the internet. Anything that you want to go internally, so to your domain controllers, app servers, anything like that, that goes down the VPN tunnel. That works best from a performance perspective because you're not then kind of tromboning your traffic, especially services such as Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, YouTube, anything high bandwidth. In other scenarios that can potentially be going through your data center, which both increases latency, but also increases load on your VPN servers themselves. With a split tunnel, anything that can go straight over the internet just does that. Although that then has impacts on potentially your security and your compliance side of things, because a lot of organizations still have a centralized proxy or monitoring solution. That means that they're not then able to control the internet traffic on the client device unless that traffic is being routed through the internal network. Now, there are technologies out there to avoid that and to actually push that proxy and that control to the endpoint. Cisco Umbrella is one of the the longest running ones, but the latest updates to Windows Defender ATP with I believe it's E5, which I appreciate not everyone's got, as it's really rather expensive. But that allows you to do that internet categorization and control actually at the device level. Therefore, it doesn't matter where that internet traffic hits the edge, because it's still being controlled actually on the client. So forced tunnel is kind of the opposite of split tunnel. It just says, I don't care what your traffic is, you're going down the VPN tunnel. And that's where a lot of organizations, especially in kind of governmental sectors, have traditionally operated, and where they want to try and operate moving forward. But it does really start to impact when you are trying to do multi-way video calls, things like that. It's also massively increases the amount of VPN servers that you potentially need, because every packet that you send over that tunnel needs to be decrypted and then retransmitted by the VPN server. So there are a couple of other options. Forced tunnel with exceptions is probably our most popular deployment at the moment. This basically says everything goes down the tunnel unless you explicitly say that it's safe to go out of your device. And this means that you can kind of allow list all of your like Office 365 traffic, because you know and you in theory trust Microsoft and the Office 365 endpoints, so that traffic such as SharePoint or Microsoft Teams can go direct. You know that and you trust that, but anything to the wider internet then goes back through your data center and therefore through all of your standard proxies and controls. The main problem with the forced tunnel with exceptions is that it increases complexity and it increases maintenance. So Microsoft do provide a script that will modify your VPN profile to include all of the Microsoft IP address ranges. Although the problem with that is that Microsoft reserve the right to update those lists on a weekly basis, which means in theory you could be updating your profile every single week, which most organizations won't do. But then you've got that a potential for more and more traffic starting to go through your tunnel over time as those routes change. And the final option is actually was written by NCSC in collaboration with Microsoft, and is called what they've called it managed tunnel. It's very similar to forced tunnel with exceptions, except that it then wraps a further set of client firewall changes around it, so that in the event that the VPN tunnel comes up, rather than it just allowing all traffic out to the internet because there's no VPN, the managed tunnel actually then actively blocks the traffic leaving the device unless it has been explicitly allowed or it is going down the VPN tunnel. So this is designed much more to, this was originally designed to get around some of the issues with direct access, which couldn't do forced tunnel with exceptions. It was fundamentally not possible. But it also applies to AOVPN, where you have that kind of regulatory or contractual obligation to not fail open, but fail closed instead. In general, if you're looking at the managed tunnel, I'd probably be recommending that you went forced tunnel with exceptions, simply because if something did go wrong, you generally want your users to be able to still use their device in some kind of limited capacity over having it completely broken until you fix the solution. So ultimately, when you're talking about routing and remote access servers, you're talking about Windows or MPS servers, you're talking about Windows servers, which means that from a security perspective, you've got to patch them, and making, especially as they are effectively internet facing servers, making sure they are patched is doubly critical. When you're talking about AOVPN, and RAS servers, you can have them as domain joined or work group. The actual VPN servers themselves don't need to be domain joined. So generally, I would be suggesting that they should be work group joined. This is a change from the direct access technology where it had to be a domain joined machine out in the DMZ. DMZ design comes into is also an important factor, especially when you are talking about things like, generally we recommend that you have dual NICs, so you have an inbound and an out, traffic coming in and a traffic going to the internal network. That allows you to do that separation of kind of dirty and clean traffic, but also allows you to block things like RDP from the actual internet facing network, block those kind of wider port requirements. But especially when you start talking about routing internet traffic inbound, i.e. in a forced tunnel like scenario, the routing side of your DMZ design can become very challenging. And then finally, the firewalls. It is very often seen that between your VPN server and the internal network, and any rule is put in just to make things easier to get between for those client devices. Once they are authenticated to the network, they then have access to go anywhere and do anything. That would be considered a form of eggshell security. You've got that kind of hard, crunchy outer layer, but once you are actually on that VPN server, you're authenticated, you can go pretty much anywhere In general, you should be trying to lock that down to the minimum list of ports and protocols and IP addresses that those VPN clients need, especially segregating away anything important, such as, say, network management interfaces, anything that can help an attacker escalate those their rights internally. And finally, scalability and high availability. So this is highly dependent on traffic flow, especially if you go for something like split tunnel, and all you're doing is talking to a file server on logon kind of thing. You can obviously get a lot more users per VPN tunnel than if you've got an entire company whose job it is to stream YouTube via a forced tunnel. And then that comes into the design side of things of, do you want high availability? So do you want the ability, if you've got two data centers, to be able to fail over from, if one data center fails, to fail over to the other data center? That's all possible, but especially on the AOVPN side, can be complicated by the fact that you can only set a single VPN server. So you have to use things like geo-redundant load or DNS load balancing, things like Azure Traffic Manager can do it, or Kemp Geo Master, I think it's called, is a good example, and we've used that in a number of organizations to provide that multi-site high availability. And then even in a single site, there's always that decision as to whether you scale out, so you have multiple VPN servers, or do you scale up and you just start throwing lots and lots of resources at a single server to provide more users access. In general, what we tend to recommend is a scale out approach. So putting maybe up to about 1,000 users on a server, and then after that, so going to 2 or 3 servers per site. And the reason for that is that while you can scale up to a point, you do get diminishing returns. And you also then get the issue with blast radius, where if one server goes down, it's better to affect 1,000 users than 10,000 users. And if you do have a problem with a server, you've got that capability to just pull one out of your load balancing pool, and the others will take over. Whereas if you've only got that one server that is starting to go wrong, you've got no ability to do any testing without also affecting production. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour of kind of VPN security. Any questions?
That was spot on, mate. I think we can all look at that and think, wow, I'm gonna have to go back and look at the documentation and maybe juice some stuff up. That was really good eye opener. I was interested actually when we were talking about the different tunneling methods. So yep, perhaps we're looking at split tunnel, or maybe somebody's considering kind of a forced tunnel with exception. Have you seen any use cases where somebody has specifically gone down the forced tunnel with exception route?
A lot of government sites or organisations such as councils, NHS, they do go down that forced tunnel with exceptions route, and it's primarily down to the networking team requiring to be able to block sites, and the only way that they do that at the moment is through some kind of proxy that they have on their site, and they've not moved to a device-based proxy solution at this point. So going to a split tunnel leaves them, or makes them feel like they are being led or being more open to those kinds of attacks.
Yeah, because generally, even with an explicit proxy, it's user traffic, isn't it? Not the device traffic going out of the split tunnel. locally.
Yeah, so you can run split tunnel and then have a proxy file that pushes the traffic internally still, but there's no guarantees as such.
The device will still go off on this the local connection.
Yeah,
Okay.
and what's more is that more and more organizations are actually moving to more of a transparent proxy route.
Yeah.
So there is no proxy file, or there's nowhere to actually point the traffic to actually force it through with like a pack file or something, which again means that you either have to go full split tunnel or move towards a forced tunnel and actually route it on an IP level.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, we're listening to what Sandy was saying earlier in terms of the amount of traffic being forced on the VPN in that particular scenario. You know, if somebody's got a forced tunnel and they're thinking, hang on a minute, I want to start sending my traffic to pull down content from the CDN locally. I don't want it coming down, you know, the tunnel, but
Yeah.
I've forced everything. So in that situation, I guess the admins are going to be scrambling to find a solution to make sure all the Office 365 endpoints are added as an exception.
Yeah.
Have you seen that particular scenario? Was that something that?
Yeah, so that was something that came out a couple of weeks into COVID, which really kind of kicked off the forced tunnel with exceptions story. And Microsoft do have a script that will pull down the Office 365 routes into your.
Service.
Sorry.
The endpoint web service, is that?
Yeah, it utilizes that, and then it actually goes and generates the VPN XML attributes to do those exclusions. We've had mixed results. Some organizations have been claiming issues with getting to Microsoft services after that. So in theory, it should all work fine. Some organizations are saying it's working fine, others are having issues. So your mileage may vary on that.
Absolutely.
But
I mean,
yeah,
I've certainly seen for myself where you're using a published list of IPs, but then when you actually look at, you know, your firewall logs or Wireshark, your endpoints are going off to other Azure services. So when Microsoft have an issue and they start load balancing globally, and those endpoints aren't considered, you know, initially, like you say, you can then start seeing some problems.
Yeah, traffic flow is certainly the biggest discussion when it comes to designing these kinds of things, because it has such a massive knock-on impact on both the design of the tunnel and also in terms of the routing and the DMZ infrastructure, because you've also, especially when you go for a dual NIC solution, the traffic actually then needs to go back out of that in quotes external DMZ, because otherwise you get asynchronous routing, because your client is coming in from a public IP address. You then want to send it, then sending a request to a public IP address, which you then want to run on your internal network or go through your internal network. But then you've got to respond back to that public IP address of the original client VPN request. And that's where you've got some real issues. The way that we've traditionally got around that is by masking the IP addresses behind a load balancer, so that all the VPN traffic looks like it's coming internally. But that then has its own set of problems around limitations within routing and remote access, where there are certain hard-coded limits to the number of connections from a single IP address. And that you basically have to restart your servers daily to avoid those kinds of issues. So it's certainly not ideal on that side of things. And for anyone who is seeing those kinds of issues, there's some great articles from Richard Hicks, who is the blogger on AOVPN. If you guys aren't already aware.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on his website a lot during the direct access days.
Yeah,
certainly a valuable resource. And again, there's another thing that struck me during your presentation, Leo, is when we're looking at Sandy's presentation as well, we were talking about how many things changes, you know, impact other technologies in your environment. So when we mention a two-tier CA, I guess a lot of companies just deployed a single tier CA, and now where they're considering AOVPN to be secure, is how do they approach, you know, that two-tier setup. So one work stream that maybe looks like a single line on a presentation deck is actually can be quite complex to address.
Yeah, and that's actually often where we do PKI implementations. It is actually normally because we've gone in and someone's come to us and said we'd like a VPN solution. We're saying, well, what's your authentication for that looking like? And it's probably some kind of 2008 R2 single tier box that someone put in 5 years ago because they needed a PKI and didn't really know what was they were doing, which is a lot of cases. And there was like, well, that's just, well, you can technically use that, but you really don't want to. And that's where there is that, then you do the PKI first and then you do the AOVPN, because again, the way that the certificates are so deeply integrated into the VPN solution, it's a real pain to modify that at a later date.
Absolutely. And SC has got some really good baselines and advice to follow. So, I mean, what I'd like to say thank you, Leo, for that. That was really spot on. I learned a great deal. Leo's contact details are on the slide now. They're on our meetup page, and Leo's on Twitter if you've got any more questions. But that was really good. Thank you, Leo, for joining us. Thank you.
My pleasure, and I'm of course happy to share the slides.
It's very kind. Maybe ping them to me on an email or a link to it. That'd be grateful that I can share those out. Thank you, Leo. Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, we're slightly overrunning, but that's cool because we've hit lunch now. I'm gonna head off to grab a bite to eat. We're going to take a short pause. We're going to carry on with the schedule as normal. So at 1:30, we'll be joined by MVP Simon Binder. Really cool session on managing personal devices and corporate devices. So really looking forward to that. So let's rejoin at 1:30 this afternoon, GMT +1. So that's 1:30 British Summer Time, which is in half an hour. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you shortly.